All Aretha ever asked is for people to give her her propers. And Reverend Jasper Williams got in the pulpit at her funeral and disrespected the life she lived. Welcome to the Real Drunk Show. Today we are talking toxic theology. With us today are Verdale. Dang, I can't talk.
Are you drunk already?
I just had like 3 sips.
What's a sip to you? I've known you for a while, Kia. Let's discuss this.
I smell like a solid glass.
Wait, that's not the same glass you had before.
Oh, well, this is coffee. So I'm doing this weird thing where I'm alternating coffee and wine. So yeah, I don't love my life.
I don't. Do you want to talk about it, sis? Is this something that you want to talk about? Are you that stressed out over the topic?
I'm going to be up all night reading, so I'm just trying to prepare myself mentally. Yeah. So we have Verdale and Courtney with us. Courtney, you're the newbie. You want to introduce yourself? Tell us where you're from and what you're drinking.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I'm the newbie. I'm Courtney. I am from, well, I'm not from Chicago, so I won't say I'm from Chicago, lest all the Chicago people jump on me. I'm in the Chicago area. I live in the suburbs, so I'm gonna be real truthful. I live in the suburbs, but my church is in the city, and I'm drinking Patron Añejo with some lime juice.
Ooh. That sounds like something I would like. Although we were talking about being elitist towards emails, I'm also elitist towards Patron, but that's a whole nother story.
Oh, what's wrong? Wow, what's wrong with Patron?
I have a problem with any alcoholic beverage that rappers rap about.
So you never had no Hypnotic, no Ciroc, what else?
I did have Hypnotic. I do not do Ciroc, though. I mean, and in my defense, I started drinking Hypnotic in college before I had alcohol standards. So,
that's fair.
But I know a lot of people who like, I'm also drinking like $5 wine. So, I mean, consider that.
You better go somewhere with your barefoot and stop talking about me.
Right. So, you know, it ebbs and flows. You just never know what you're going to get. Verdale, what's going on?
I'm good. It's raining here. This week it's always humid in Washington, D.C. It's been 1,000 degrees all week, and now it's raining. What am I? I'm drinking a strawberryta because I want to kind of get back to my hood roots. They didn't have any paper bags for me to carry it in. That's the only thing. I wanted a paper bag. But they didn't have any more. I was very upset about that. I had some peanut M&Ms too. They didn't have any hot fries to get, and then I would have been really sick. But yeah.
Oh my goodness. I went to my mom's house for Labor Day, and she had a refrigerator full of Lime-A-Ritas. So yeah, I went back to the hood roots as well. But I don't drink Patron. I know it's weird, y'all. Just it makes sense in my mind.
Hey, no judgment.
No, none at all. You know what? It's okay. And as long as we're not going to talk about it over an AOL email address, I'm fine.
Oh, that's your hate mail from your AOL email addresses.
I will legit look over it like, oh, this must be spam that got through the filter. If you don't want me to know, hide it in an AOL email address. You can hide it in plain sight. I'll never see it.
Oh.
So, guys, how many episodes of Aretha Franklin's funeral did you see? Because you know she gave us like a whole season in one sitting. Did y'all binge watch it all, or did you only catch a couple of episodes?
I watched you know how they had the reviews with the spoilers, with the clips.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I watched. I saw the trailer image with her feet crossed in the casket.
Listen,
and all of that. So
raised the price. Before that, I wanted to be cremated. Now I was adding Cameron on Twitter like, this is how you need to make sure I go out.
Her legs are crossed. I mean,
And the shoes, the Louboutins. Oh my goodness.
Yes. So I had also never seen like a full body viewing. Usually the funerals I go to, the bottom half is closed. So that was new to me.
that dress though, you gotta be able to see the whole dress.
I mean, she was doing it.
You can't see the dress and the shoes. I mean, usually I'm very anti. Anti-funeral. Very, very anti-funeral business type stuff. But in that case, I was like, look, this was a good one. I'm usually tell people, nope, this is all a scam. Don't do it. But this time, yes. I mean, well, not the whole dying part. You can't really avoid the dying part, but the whole funeral part. Nope, it's a scam. Don't do it. They're gonna take all your money. But this time, I was like, okay, we'll let it go.
You know what? I felt the same way. I've always like, don't spend all that money on me, but I'm not Aretha Franklin either, so they'll probably still cremate me. But that's a dream, right? She had the service of a queen up until a point. What was y'all's favorite part of the service? Let's start there before we get to.
Let's see. I don't know. It's a toss-up, right? I mean, we had Shirley Caesar, who sang her tribute and then sang. We had Shaka Khan with the words on the fan, but she gave us Shaka Khan. And then we had Fantasia, who just so I mean, it's a three-way tie, I think.
And Mama Shirley Caesar came out in her good wig too. She wasn't playing with this.
She was, yeah.
That steadfast, immovable wig.
Yeah.
And her girdle too. The girdle was holding her. She was held together. I'm just gonna tell the truth.
You need to know who she's using.
Because one day I'm gonna be that old and want to wear a sequin dress too. And if I don't look as good as her, then we're gonna have problems. So I need to know.
My favorite part, well, she said, I like all the musical parts. I like those, of course, but I'm going to be a little unorthodox, even though I know we'll talk about her later. My favorite part was Ariana Grande because I'm a jerk, probably. And the reason why is because it was so clear that she had no idea what was happening. Before all the BS started, it's like what she came dressed in and whatever. And people were talking about her, but it was clear that no one prepped her on what this was in the situation. And so it wasn't like, it's one of those situations where it's like, if you feel like if somebody told her, she would quickly adjust, but she didn't mean to. Like, this was in her mind, she was like dressing up the way that she thought made sense. And she came in there and then got looks for it anyway. And then, just that part was just like, yeah, no one told her that no. Because you say if you're talking to somebody who, if the best clothing they have is club clothes, and they say wear your best, and they come to the club in stilettos and fishnets, that's their best. You know what I mean?
I'm not the best at this because I have absolutely worn fishnets to church. Now, when I wore the fishnets, I wore the flat knee-high boots and not the stiletto knee-high boots, so it didn't look hooker. It was more like contemporary. Not quite hooker, but it was edgy.
Well, listen,
right.
If Sister Hattie can wear her work clothes to church, then so can the person who's on the street. And I maybe why not? And they say, wear my Sunday best. This is the best that I got. But it's like, okay, if no one kind of told her what the deal was, it was just kind of that she was there, and I was like, oh, I feel bad. Like, this is funny, but I feel bad.
Right.
It's not her fault.
I somewhat felt bad for her, but I also was like, Sister Girl could have watched a movie. Like, we got funerals in every Black movie just about. She could have watched a movie or something to see what to wear. But I understood that she was trying, like she tried, and the dress was cute. Don't get me wrong, the dress was real cute. Like, I would wear something like that. Probably not to be on the pulpit, but I would wear it. But what killed me was the hashtag ponytail longer than her dress. And oh my God. fell out laughing when I saw it. I dropped my phone because it was funny and not like in a body shame. I know people meant it that way, not in a body shaming type of way, because like she looked good. She looked good. She was cute. I wouldn't have chosen that outfit, but she was cute. But that hashtag took me out because it was funny and it was true.
But you know what I've realized though, between this funeral and like Whitney's funeral, a lot of people, this is like their big introduction to Black funerals.
Mm-hmm,
and so a lot of people, and particularly even let's say if you're Black and you don't really go to church or anything like that, you've probably never seen how a funeral, like what we think of funeral, even as a low key one, is nowhere near what other people think of as funerals. So it's like
true.
You got to be told, like, oh no, this isn't going to be like we're going to all walk in, someone's going to play a ukulele, release some dubs, and then we go home. No, this is an event. Like, we've been preparing for this. This has to go a certain way. Everything, like it's grander in a way than most people would recognize unless they've actually been to one.
Mm-hmm.
And you'd be surprised if people don't realize. It's like, oh wait, why is it this long?
Mm-hmm.
Long? This was kind of short. What you mean?
Look, I told my mama she gets an hour. After an hour, I'm gonna have to leave. All I can give you is an hour because she has this big Aretha Franklin grand event happening. I'm like, Wanda, 1 hour.
No, it's a big deal. When my grandmother passed, I mean, we wasn't even, ain't nobody famous, but still, it was like, it was just the level of detail. Even if it's not a big deal, the level of detail and precision that we have with funerals is something that if you've never been around it, you don't get it. Somebody has to tell you. It's like, oh, no. This is what's, yes, is important. Who has the body? We need to know. Yes, that matters.
Oh, I was going to, that crossed my mind. Why is that a question we always go to? There are two questions that are always asked when it comes to a Black funeral. Who has the body and do they look good?
Like, do they look like they did when they were alive?
Right.
Listen, when that was my grandmother, when she passed, she looked more like herself than when she was alive. I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing, so that made me feel good. But then, but yeah, I mean, back home, you know, where I'm from in the hood, it's like, it's but 2 or 3 funeral homes. And you just know certain people attack you. Someone don't take, if they're so-and-so, don't do it. They don't know how to handle the body, or they didn't know where it was, or don't do that. The detail matters.
It does. And especially, I think for us, especially as Black people, it really matters because we deal with so much in life that in death, we at least deserve to look like we're at peace. So I think it matters. For my family, we have my grandmother's brother owned a funeral home, so everyone in our family goes to
my grandmother
them.
Did too.
So look, the house that I grew up in as a child was actually the first funeral home house. My parents bought it from, so I grew up in a funeral home. There were no bodies in there when I lived there, but yeah, I grew up in a funeral home, and my friends would spend the night at my house because I thought there might be. But I'm not even gonna get into that.
Like, did you ever like feel spirits or see anything?
No, it was just a house, and it was like I have 5 younger siblings. We have a big family. It was a house, and it was big enough, and I had my own room, and that's all I really cared about.
I know that's right.
That's real.
I mean, I'm gonna just tell the truth. I had my own room. We was good. So, but so that's not, at least for my family, something that we've ever had to really worry about because we just know that it's going to be handled. But I've seen other people who have dealt with it and they get there and they're really displeased with the results. And it's kind of like one last like insult that people have to deal with in a life that's filled with them. So I think that, that's my personal opinion anyway. That's why we watch.
I don't think people also realize, like, so many people don't realize what happens when you die until someone dies, and if it's someone close to them where they have to actually know what all happens. So it's so many things like, of course, people can just be tacky with how they do hair and makeup, so like that too. But then it's like, okay, when you die, stuff changes with your body, and so the muscles aren't there, the fluids aren't there, all these types of things, and so well, they don't look like so-and-so. That's because her face, the muscles in her face don't move. That's why she looks like that, because she was laying down. There's no fluid. She wasn't drinking. She wasn't stretching. So that's why she looks like, you know what I mean? It's little things. And the expense, too. I mean, clearly, Aretha didn't have to worry about that. But it's like the money that comes into play, too, is like, and also, like, my mom, like, when my situation, like, she was able to get her clothes, you know? And so what if you don't have access to the person's clothes? What if you can't find the right things? What if what looks the best doesn't fit? What if you can't get someone to do the hair that knows how to do that person? Well, the hair, don't worry about it. The hair is dead anyway, so it's not going to be no different. You know, but it's also things. And then the money, too, it's like, okay, people running out of money to do all this. So it's like, oh, that stuff looks bad. It's like, okay, well, look. They had to pay $1,000 for that pine box to put them in. You know what I mean? And so it's just so many things that the stuff that Aretha and folks like her never have to worry about. So she can basically have a caravan that she wants. When I die, I want to be a tree. So there, real cheap.
Someone sent me, we were having this conversation thanks to Aretha on Twitter, and one of my old interns sent me this thing, and they like put you in, I don't want to call it a paperweight, but it's something of the maybe it's marble or something. I can't remember. I'll have to
It's like a pod, right? Like they put you in a pod and put you in the ground.
Yeah, it's like a marble paperweight or something. But my fear with that would be like, if Cameron lost me, I feel like that would be emotionally traumatizing to him. Like, I lost the marble ball that was my mom. I don't know how you process that.
No.
So we are here to talk about toxic theology. I guess to back it up a little, what is theology even? What do we mean when we say theology?
Ooh. Well, I mean, we can go with the technical definition, I guess, which is, you know, the study of God. But I don't know. For me, it's a little deeper than that, right? I think it's every thought we have. So there are theologians who go to school and study it, but everybody, to an extent, is a theologian in some way or shape or form. Whether or not they have a degree in theology, but we all have theological thought. We all have our thoughts about the character of God, the nature of God, what role God has in our lives, or whether there even is a God. So we're all, to an extent, we all engage in the practice of theology to an extent, maybe not academically, but in a practical way, in the way we live, in the way we go through our lives.
Yeah, exactly that. I really appreciate how, Courtney, how you said how, even though, I mean, yes, it's true that people go to school and they're, you know, they become professional academic theologians, but just, I mean, even saying, I don't believe there is a God is a theological statement.
Exactly.
And you don't have to be a person of faith to think theologically in that type of way. I think that's something a lot of folks miss. Which is like theology and just in the everyday. It's like it's everywhere, and it's not just Christian either. It's like the way that people conceptualize like God and supernatural activity, and just how it works around and through and with them. If people have thoughts about those types of things, like just, you know, basically just saying, you know, hey, something as simple as saying, you know, the universe is working it out for me, is a theological statement. And that I think people need to be more aware of that to see how it happens in the everyday and not just in classrooms and boring conferences.
Yeah, boring conferences. Familiar. So when we say toxic theology, what does that look like? How can your God thoughts be toxic? If you're listening to the podcast, Cordell's face just did this thing. So we'll let him get started.
Well, I think it's such a big question. I think
that's fair.
I think the thing about it is that beyond what everybody believes, ultimately people put their ideas of who and what God is. Like they take their ideas and they put them and they use God as like a filter to put them into the world. So the reality is, if I feel a way about women's bodies, then my God feels a way about women's bodies. Doesn't matter to give me a Bible, a Quran, a comic book. It doesn't matter. You know, and it doesn't. I don't want to negate how theological spaces shape those ideas. So I don't want to negate that. It's a cycle, I believe. But oftentimes, if you take away if you were to take away theological tools, they would still think these things. They kind of reinforce one another. And so even if you're people who don't go to church or who aren't outwardly religious, let's say if it's something about women, like, oh no, this is what men are meant to do and what women are meant to do. And it sounds very similar to what somebody might say in a sermon about women. And so these ideas are pervading. And so it's like they feed into one another. But religion is like a sponge, you know, in that whatever you put it in is what it's going to soak up. And it can be a bunch of other liquids around, but if you put it in orange juice, it's going to soak up the orange juice, and that's what it's going to be. And the fact that, again, many of us live in a culture where it's like it's not just the outwardly demonstrative, cruel things that we can easily say, okay, yeah, that's bad. Like, you're like, ooh, Nazis, bad, you know, not like that. But we implicitly.
Can we even say that for sure these days? Like,
I mean, even that's a controversy. So, like, to be real, but there's so many things that we just assume is correct, that we assume are correct, that are really bad, that they seep out in everyday culture, whether you go to church or not. But I think toxic theology is where those things are reinforced and presented as, this is how you are a good disciple. This is how you are a good Christian. This is what God wants from us. God wants these things, and these things are ultimately delete and harm other people. I think that's what it comes out to being toxic theology. The whole thing where, oh, I see land over there, I'm going to take it, it's mine because you're gay, because you are a sex worker, because you're a single mom, because of these things, you know. And I think we'll talk to hit on this later. I think also toxic theology is not just the blatant stuff, but also the very subtle stuff that we believe too. That comes off. It sounds very inspirational, like, you know, while y'all sleeping, I'm grinding. You know, you attract what you are, type of stuff. That stuff is incredibly toxic.
In
Yeah.
a lot of ways. Learn that the hard way, actually.
You know, so. But yeah, that's just my thoughts.
Yeah, Courtney, I'm going to jump in here. I have one more question for Verdell, though, just to clarify. So you said that people project their beliefs onto God. What would some people are listening and they're saying, but the Bible says this, and the Bible is the sacred word of God. So how can I be projecting my beliefs onto God when I can look in this Bible and it says the same thing?
I mean, I think that's the challenge, and I think that's the problem with the divide between, let's say, seminary, well, some seminaries, and how people live their faith in everyday life. Because, like, one thing I saw in seminary was that the Bible doesn't actually say anything. You have to read it, and that seems real simple. But when you think about it that way, it's like, oh, wait a minute, like, this thing literally isn't talking to me. But I can literally open that book and find an excuse to do whatever I want. What's going to happen is I'm going to read the things that connect more with who I am and what I agree with. The things that are going to jump out to me the most. Right. And so if I already grew up in a society that, you know, kind of strongly suggests that gay people are bad, of course, all the scriptures that look like it's saying that are going to jump out to me, and I'm going to flip to those. Religion is a very human product, and we shape it to fit what we want and need at the time, the same way we do with God, the same way. I mean, that's the way it's been forever. And so that human dynamic is like, oh, well, this is the word of God. Well, 20 years ago, it might have been something different. And 50 years from now, it'll be something else. It's just that we're in this particular situation right now. And I think that's the issue, is that you can find something for anything if you really want to look for it. Does that mean it's the right thing to do? I think the best way to put it is everything that's biblical isn't actually right. And I think that that's the point that people miss. Is like, it's biblical to go to somebody. I mean, I can make a case for burglary. I feel, I mean, from the Bible, I mean, look, across from my apartment is this bigger apartment, and they have really nice furniture. And because I believe I'm anointed, I heard God tell me I need to go take their place. I'm going to go walk around their apartment, and everywhere my foot lands is going to be mine. And so I'm going to take it.
Right. And and you know, if their wife or daughter is there, you know, just kill the man and rape the wife, cut her fingernails and her hair first, and then she's yours.
Yeah.
So, you know,
very simple.
You can do whatever you want to do, really.
And people might say that example sounds extreme, but that's really what people do on a day-to-day. It sounds ridiculous.
But it's in the book.
You know? Yeah, it's in the book. Like, that's God said, this is our land. I know there are people here, so they're bad because why? Because we said so. We don't. They never tell us if they're bad or not. We don't know. You know.
That was the thing about reading the Old Testament. They're talking about God gave them this land and all these bad people, and you're flipping and you're like, but what did the people do to become bad? Like, at what point?
Yeah, God is our great excuse for so much, and I think that's really the thing that that people sometimes don't realize. Because I think, but also too, I think in circles that kind of we're into, because people approach religion talking about God, because they are also practitioners of those religions, that it's kind of hard for them to step away and think of religion as a human experience too, because it's so important to them and they live in their everyday life. Like, you know, like it's hard to be that they say doctors make the worst patients type of thing. So
right.
It's kind of hard if you're a devout Christian. You know, it's kind of hard to maybe step away and say, okay, let's look at religion as a human experience. Oh, so I do fall into this category. Oh, wait, there are some things I'm missing here about how people do this. You know, like in a sociological way or a psychological way that you might miss if it's just, I love Jesus.
Courtney, you want to hop in there and tell us about toxic theology?
Yeah, so I agree with everything Verdell said. For me, I'd put it simply as toxic theology is anytime you use God as your excuse to exclude someone that you just don't want around. When you decide that someone else is not worthy, when none of us are worthy. So once you've decided that someone else is not worthy for whatever reason it is, because you just happen to not do that thing that you think makes them unworthy, that's toxic theology. Even if you can find it in the Bible, even if, like, once you decontextualize 2 or 3 or 7 scriptures or whatever, and you've taken that out of the message of what the entire Bible says, which is that God is love, God is merciful, and God redeems us time and time again when we don't deserve it. Once you take 3 or 4 or however many scriptures out of that context and use that to single out and to exclude anyone, that's when theology becomes toxic. And it's just us blaming our personal preferences on God. So for me, is we all, you know, whatever, we all sin or whatever, if you want to, like, however you define sin, whatever, we all do it no matter what. None of us is perfect. We're all human. But at the end of the day, God is love. And for me, there are things I don't know. My theology can't encompass all of who God is. But when we choose not to err on the side of love, that's when we're actively harming people, then that's when theology is toxic. And even if we don't know we're harming people, no matter who we are, we hurt people with our beliefs, period. We're all problematic. So, and all of us have some aspect of our theology is toxic, all of us, no matter who we are. Like, because we're all imperfect. But when we refuse to acknowledge that, accept that, listen to the people that we're harming, the people that we choose to exclude purposely, and we refuse to hear their experiences and adjust, grow, love more, that's when we're being toxic. That's when, because we are then choosing to continue in that way.
And when I think toxic theology, just to add on, I think of all the isms and that come up. It's the racism from the pulpit, the misogyny from the pulpit, the ableism, the homophobia from the pulpit. All those things where it is belittling and dehumanizing other people that we hear so often in our churches. So I guess my next question would be, how did this show its head at Aretha's funeral?
Well,
we're still here, guys. We're coming.
Let's see. We can talk about who was there, because like I said, everyone's problematic. None of us are perfect. Some of the people there have chosen to grow a little bit, but we can start with Farrakhan, Jesse Jackson, Bill Clinton. We can start with Judge Mathis. We can start with Tasha Cobbs. We can start with a whole bunch of people.
I mean,
that is so interesting, and I'm glad you thought of that, because a lot of people would have gone directly to the eulogy or directly to
the sermon.
What did you say, Burdell?
The sermon. That was not a eulogy.
Right.
It was supposed to be a
eulogy. It was a eulogy for Franklin.
It was supposed to be a eulogy, and he did a sermon, which was fail number one.
He said attempt. So he didn't say attempt. He didn't say he was going to do one. He said he would attempt to do one.
But that is that you brought up that all the other people who were there who have been toxic at some point in time in their lives and ministries.
And I think the point about that, though, because it's true that all of us are imperfect and all of us make mistakes. I can think back on my days as the super Christian kid, and the things that I thought and believed and said were, I know, wrong, bad. I think, though, there's something to be said when you have a certain amount of power and reach and goal, and I think that's what gets missed when it's like, particularly I say like someone like T.D. Jakes, you know what I mean? It's like, whose career has been literally created off the backs of Black women's pain. Somehow, he is the liberator. This man from wherever is the person who has the word from God to loose the woman. And he's written all these books and all these things, and so now he's famous. And and that's a reach that me and my little problematic self will never have. And so it doesn't mean that I'm off the hook, but to treat us all as the same when T.D. Jakes is a household and rest stop name. Like I go to a rest stop and spin the book turnstile, you'll see a book of his there. And so to say that he's not, that to put that at the same thing, it's just not, you know what I mean? It's just not fair. Even if there has been growth, like we all grow, sure, fine.
Right.
What has been done to rectify the wrong?
What does toxic theology do to people? And I'm asking big questions, I know, but also not just the people in the church, but people in the communities that these messages are being preached to. How does that affect us?
So what comes to the top of my mind, because it's so important and it's so big and it's so, to me, it's angering, it's sad, it's sobering, it causes me to have to stop and kind of pause and look at what the church that's supposed to be this life-bringing, like you have this message, this life-bringing message. But let's talk about the kids, the LGBTQIA kids who are in the church, who are killing themselves at a higher rate than and continuously getting higher than any other population of kids, because we're telling them that God hates them, they're just so detestable that they feel like they just would rather not live. Let's like starting there, because like hurting children is just, I don't know. I just can't even. I can't even talk about it right now. So that's where I start.
And you know, my mom, she had a big problem because I wouldn't make Cameron, my son, go to church. But as someone who identifies as a gay man, I did not feel comfortable forcing my child to sit in buildings where it may or may not come up,
Mm-hmm.
that dehumanizes who he is. And
Right.
and he actually is better about it than I am, because I am all about getting up and walking out, and he's just like, just relax, mom. But but I don't think she quite gets that. And then I think about even so there was this story recently about the 11-year-old, 10-year-old boy who committed suicide because he was being bullied at school about his sexuality. And which expands that, like, no child should be sitting in a church where they're hearing these messages.
Right.
Because and I think that's how that toxic theology affects the community as a whole, because if you're sitting in a church, even if you don't identify as the people who are being dehumanized from the pulpit, you take that behavior, or you take those ideas and principles outside of the church, and it becomes your lived behavior, and you're causing harm to other people.
Yeah, I agree. I think to tack on to what both of you have said, I think to add a couple of things. One, there is a growing body of research that is looking into the impact of religion and the harm that it does to people. I'm not saying that religion in and of itself causes harm, but you know, religious it's an actual term for it, religious trauma syndrome. The people, and the reason why, like, it's listed under PTSD, and so it doesn't have its own name, but it's listed as that. And just the reality, and this is hard for people to get, particularly even in our like more Black progressive Christian circles, because people love church so much that it's really hard for them to grasp how church can be dangerous to somebody unless it directly impacts them. Then it's bad. It's like, oh no, you're hurting me. Now we have to shut everything down. But you over there, we can take our time. But that's for another story. But it's the idea that people literally are going through PTSD, committing suicide, even beyond, like, you know, talking about queer issues, which is bad enough, but just like regular everyday people who have been hampered in their lives because of their exposure to toxic theology and toxic religion. And so that's one thing that I think, like, there are a lot of people who are in church or who are leaving church, or people who are still in church now, who are hampered in how they live their lives because of the religion they were taught. And I think that's something, and that is far more pervasive than I think that's comfortable to be honest about. You know what I mean? I think that's that part there too. But even if you aren't a believer, you know, toxic theology that says, hey, a woman doesn't have the right to over her body. You could be an atheist person who wants to have an abortion and you can't, because the toxic theology has, you know, mobilized and got enough power to get rid of all the abortion clinics. And so toxic theology is really, you know, and I don't exaggerate. I don't think this is exaggeration. It's a public, to me, it's a public health concern. Because if you think that your God gives you the right to say all of these really outlandish, verifiably untrue things about people, that's dangerous. Like, this is beyond our own personal beliefs. Like, no. Vaccines are important.
Right.
You know, the world is round. You know what I mean? Like, things like this, where it's like, no. It's like, and when we get to the point where our personal beliefs degrade the safety of society for wide segments of people, then it doesn't matter if you're a believer or not, because you're not safe. You know what I mean? Like, if me and my atheist, you know, self, or whoever else is bringing their child to school with somebody who believes that vaccines, God doesn't. I see it was Kenneth Copeland said that they don't take flu shots. They just read Galatians something or whatever. And that was their flu shot. And so because you want your kid to be like that, my kid is around your kid, and because you don't want to do that, the herd immunity goes down, and so my kid gets some type of random disease that no one had since the Ice Age and dies because of you and your beliefs. It's like we're not safe. Now all of a sudden my whole house is gone. I'm the only one surviving because y'all didn't want to get a flu shot. You know what I mean? It puts us all in danger.
Yeah. Yeah. We teach toxic faith a lot. And just the way people believe in miracles, but people believe in miracles in a way that has them sitting on their ass waiting for stuff to fall out the sky. This is going to be a really privileged example, but my real churchy days, it was like straight out of college too, so I was broke, like big broke, and my account was so far overdrawn. Like when I tell this story, people don't even believe. Like my account was like negative $900 or something. Like,
I am impressed.
You had a nice bank because they let you overdraft.
Wait, what bank do you have?
I'm kind of old, and this was a long time ago. But I'm surprised they didn't send the sheriff to my house for like But so here I am with this messed up account, sitting in church on New Year's Eve, believing God for this faith and miracles and this and that. I wake up the next morning and my account balance is at zero. I've had like $1,000 transferred into my account. So I'm like, praise God. Thank you. Yes. Amen. He is a miracle worker. About 2 days later, my dad calls me and he's like, did you get $1,000 out my account? I'm like, no, what are you talking about? He was like, the bank moved $1,000 out of my account to your account. I was wrong. So my dad's name was still on my account.
Oh my God.
So it's like, it's this ridiculous idea of faith that miracles just fall out the sky, when a lot of times what we are viewing as a miracle is costing someone else something. And it's just, it like, that was so ridiculous and toxic. But at that time, I was sitting in a church where if you just believed, anything would happen. So like faith was the answer to everything, and you just believed, like you had faith and you would be healed. And like you were saying, no flu shots. You're just reading Galatians, quoting the word and thinking positively. And I think when we get too much of that, it causes us to get an unrealistic grasp of life and what it looks like.
Well, you know, I think because this is something that I've looked into and I like reading about it and researching about it. It's two things. And usually in the way the conversation about that goes, it's about, and I mean, I've been guilty of it too, in the past, like, silly people, how are we believe this type of thing? But a lot of times, like, I think you have to look at the society that we live in. Like, we live in a capitalist society where, right or wrong, we are basically ranked by what we have and what we can obtain. And by and large, the vast majority of people can never get those things. And people are scrambling for basic necessities. So an example that I always use that popped up to me is like, it's the dude, Johnny who works at Walmart, who works 36 hours because Walmart doesn't want to give him health insurance. And he has a gout in his foot and he doesn't have any money. And he has to either pick between making his rent by going to work or getting on the bus and going to the clinic. But he might risk losing his shift and not being able to make his rent. And maybe even if he has to go back again, maybe even losing his job because Walmart has people on the ready to fill in the spot. And so he's up late at night and all of a sudden Benny Hinn comes on the TV talking about, if you touch the screen and send me this money, you'll be healed. When you're desperate, what else would you have to do? And so for by and large, people are aiming for basic necessities and things to navigate life. And this message comes along, and the reason why they're reaching for that is because they have no other societal support whatsoever. And so it's more on the people who are telling the lies, that's bad, but it's so many people who, for them, the prosperity message is not a way just to make it big. It's to them, hey, Johnny doesn't even have shoes.
Mm-hmm.
I can't even go to school. I'm trying to not work at Walmart forever. This might be my only way out because literally nobody else, society and everybody else has turned their back and doesn't have any way for me to advance myself. I can't go to the doctor. I can't go to school. I can't get a better job. A job I had doesn't pay me. And so I just got to look up. I can't look around me, so I'm going to look up, type of thing. And I think that's something that people, I think if that part were acknowledged, we would put more of the effort, more of the fire on the people who preach this, because they're taking advantage of people who have no other option.
And you know what? We become so focused on the miracle and the faith that we don't deal with the systematic evils that cause problems. The fact that people don't get decent wages, the fact that health insurance is so hard to obtain and healthcare is so expensive. Like, these are the systematic evils that are harming all of us. And if that voice from the pulpit was to focus on changing those instead of redirecting our attention to this idea of faith and that our prayer can change our individual situation instead of a institutional or a systematic problem that affects us all, I think we would see very, very different results.
Right. But so here, the thing is that it's so easy to tell people to change themselves and to change their attitude about dealing with the injustice than it is to change the injustice. It's easier to stand in the pulpit on Sunday and give answers and to make it black and white. And we don't like to live in the difficult places, in the area, the gray area where there's no easy answer. And some of us are going to have to fight and deal with the actual problem, and because we want to say, we like to just say, well, God knows and all things are working for the good of them that love the Lord, and so then we just all want to be passive, and it's easy. And I just had this discussion just a couple of days ago. It's easy to take those places and say, be passive and just deal with it and pray more, because you're only upset about it because your faith isn't strong enough. Because you have to have some type of courage. You have to have some type of strength in to fight the big things, and even to fight them knowing that maybe you won't reap the benefits in your lifetime, that the fight is bigger than just you, and it's longer and it's harder than just what you can do. But eventually, if we all fight, eventually something's got to give. I mean, and it's not just one individual person. And that was kind of why when I started with the toxic theology at the funeral, even I started with everyone other than just the easy place, which was the sermon, because it's more than just one of us. It's all of us. Very true. It's so much bigger than just pointing at, just one sermon or just one person or just one injustice, when we have a world that's built on injustice and tackling the root, nothing, we're not going to get it right. Period. We're human. We err. Life is never going to be perfect. And in my personal belief is that it's never going to be right while we're living, but that doesn't excuse me from doing the work to make it a little righter, to make it a little better, and to fight against those systematic injustices that are there, even if I personally don't reap the benefits. The thing that stands out the most to me is the student loan crisis that we have, right? And people who are so against it are the people who say, well, I paid my loans, so it's not fair that other people get theirs forgiven.
Especially when your loans were only $50. You could go to school Well, I worked the summer to pay my tuition. Well, Susie, tuition was $17 when you went to school. That's why.
Right.
If I could go to school on the money on my couch, I would be fine too.
Right. Also that, but it's even I know some younger people, like people who graduated with me, who probably had maybe a little less debt than I did because I went to school a little longer and I've done a little more things, and I didn't know nothing when I went. But they said, well, I worked hard and I forewent all these extravagant things. I didn't drink Starbucks. And so I put all that money towards my loans. So it's not fair that all these other people don't want to pay back their loans now when I paid mine. And so, and it's just, we don't see that as bigger than just ourselves and our own personal experience. And yeah, maybe I can withstand the violence, but there are 10 other people that if I spoke up for my limited privilege, then maybe they don't have to withstand as much. Maybe we can make it a little bit easier for them. Maybe my kids or my grandkids can live in a world that's a little bit easier for them. I mean, so, and that's the thing. We have to get past this personal piety thing where we're like, well, just pray harder and just have more faith, and just if you just take it to the Lord in prayer, and take your burdens to the Lord and leave them there. What a friend we have in Jesus. And don't get me wrong, because Jesus is my friend. I pray and all that good stuff. But at the end of the day, faith without works is dead. Prayer without action is useless. Pray and then fight.
So when you were talking about doing the hard work, it made me think of Reverend Barber and the Poor People's Campaign and his organizing work around what the Bible calls the least of them, the marginalized poor, victims of capitalism. And he actually spoke at Aretha Franklin's funeral, and I thought he did a great job eulogizing him.
He did the eulogy. That was the eulogy.
He did an excellent job of tying together how she spoke to the secular and the spiritual in people, and she brought that together and was a prophetic voice for the culture. And when I think he said when Aretha sung, the Holy Spirit showed up. So he did a really good of honoring all parts of her, and how God worked through all of that.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's it wasn't that was the eulogy, because the other one surely was not.
And Fantasia came on just after her, and they could have ended the service right then.
Right there. That was it. That's all.
Closing him. Let's go home.
Yeah. I mean, I think what the thing is that comes up to my mind, especially when Courtney was talking, is that Jesus was actually for systemic solution. The miracles weren't I mean, I'm not talking about them as if they were real. I'm just talking about what they function for in the story. Is to demonstrate that God is near. That what Jesus was saying and talking about was true, because look at what happened. This is abnormal thing that's happening. Jesus' solution was get rid of the Romans. It wasn't pray harder.
Right now.
It wasn't pray harder. It wasn't this. And it was no, the Romans, when Jesus attacked the temple. And I mean, to be fair, this is something people don't generally know unless you go to seminary and read and think and all that other type of stuff. And so it's not like it's just sitting there. You know what I mean? It's not like it's there's some things that are obvious, but there's also a lot of things that really aren't obvious because they're not talking to us. They're talking about people who would get it. It's if I'm sending you an email about a Corvette, I don't have to explain to you what a Corvette is because you get it. But somebody 100 years from now who's reading this would probably have to look it up because they don't know. But the thing is that, when he attacked the temple, the thing that got him, arrested and killed, this was a systemic critique on what was happening. And I think, particularly in this age, and I think I can say to somebody, I generally don't like to take titles for myself, and I still won't. But for someone who's been on the Christian online activism advocate scene for a number of years, to see a number of changes, the one thing that I think, and I think this also pertains to what happened at Aretha's funeral, which I'm sure we'll get to soon, is that, I'm trying to phrase this the right way. I've done hashtag activism. I've done the writing. It's not that that's bad. Keep doing it. We can actually do it better. However, just hopping on Twitter and rehashing somebody else's ideas is usually it's not even theirs.
Wait, what?
Just hopping on Twitter and sending a bunch of $10 words is not pushing things forward. That's not even good hashtag activism, because I've done that too. And that's not even, when people criticize hashtag activism, I often find that they're critiquing a poor form of it, because I've done it successfully a number of times. And so it's like when people are like, oh, don't just tweet. People who actually use Twitter and social media for social activism don't just tweet. And, you know what I mean? So there's that piece. But it's great, wonderful that you sat and you typed out, you typed fast and you wrote this blog and you got the numbers. Did you show this blog to your jackleg uncle preacher who continually says the same stuff? Do you get real quiet and real amenable when it comes to critiquing your own friends because you still want to be put on? Because it's real easy to fry. Oh, and I'm going to give an example because I drank too much.
Keep talking. I'm going to get more wine. This is good.
So it's real easy if let's say, and I'm not saying that one of these things are better than another. Please don't hear me as saying this. That one thing deserves more than another. Well, I'll use myself as an example, so that way they won't be as messy. Let's say,
no, go back, be messy.
I'm gonna eventually be messy, so I want to at least set it up for the right moment. So let's say if it's me, and this is what people, I'll say what I've seen people do. What people tend to do is when it's their issue, they want the whole world to stop. We all have to stop and march and fight and call the church and get this concert canceled and get this thing removed, and call the church to the point where they have to cut the phones off because everybody's calling because they have this person preaching there or whatever. But then when the situation flips, and maybe now it's some of your boys and your friends and your sister preacher friends, now we have to be patient. We can't write no thing now because you weren't woke yesterday, right? That's why often people talk about that and canceling or whatever stuff, and people say it's wrong. I laugh because it's like, first of all, no one's actually ever really canceled, not for real. No. And second, it's like it's cool when the canceling works in your favor. It's cool when it somehow rattles your own fence. We gotta wait. And I think that's my frustration, is that particularly even with this one with Aretha's funeral. It's true that outcry is bad and all the other stuff. At what point they don't care about your blogs and blogettes and your tweet streams and everything else, because we've been here for years. These are some of the same people saying some of the same things, and even the younger generation, they're savvy enough to know how to say and do things without tripping the wire, so we don't talk about them on social media. They're just as homophobic, just as sexist, just as elitist in all types of ways. They just they're savvier about it because they grew up with Twitter and social media. And so at some point, it's like, look, that article is cute, but are you gonna, when your pastor says something homophobic, are you gonna knock on his door the same way you asked me to do something for you, which is fair and legitimate? But are you gonna go knock on the door and say, Pastor, why did you say that? That was just, I don't understand why. What is your theology about men, about the LGBTQ community? What is your stance on women's bodies? That that sermon that you preached was really about whether it's a man or a woman, because the women get away with stuff. Because when they say something homophobic or something wrong or do something wrong, when you critique it, then all of a sudden you're sexist.
Right.
And that's a problem too. Which is true that sexism is very, very real a thing. So I'm not diminishing that. But that's just what I've seen in the circles kind of that we are connected to and around. And it actually holds up progress because everybody wants to be the first one to get free and not want to bring everybody else with them.
Right.
So my question is, if you are sitting in a pulpit and you hear something, you hear toxic theology at your church, let's talk about this is where you go regularly. How do you respond to that? How do you start pushing for change? Like, what should your response be?
Ooh.
Are you asked? Well, you have a response, Courtney. I talked for a while.
Ooh.
You can go
Okay.
first.
What should it be? Okay, first of all, I'm gonna say don't be like me. But I'm gonna tell you what my response has been, because that's all I can do is talk about what I've done, my experience. So I'm an associate minister at a church, and I'm probably gonna get in trouble for saying this. I hope my daddy don't watch this. He probably won't. My dad is the pastor, right? And my dad is very much old school, very staunchly Chicago Baptist, and so in everything that entails. Um, and I am, on the other hand, very much me. I am. I don't know how to put it other than I always have been, and that's the thing that and my dad tried to break me of being me when I was a kid. He's continued to try and do it. And so much so that he has even said that he prays that the Spirit just like changes my theology, which is never gonna happen. Because I'm believing God that I got this. I've been there, and now I'm here. Like I can't go backwards. And whether I'm right or wrong, one day I'm gonna have to answer for that. And if I am wrong, well, I'm gonna say I erred on the side of love, and I couldn't do anything more than that. So there's that. But my response is, and it's hard because, one, this is my dad. This is my dad's friends. These are my friends. These are the people I grew up with. I've known them my whole life. I've looked up to them. I call them uncle, like, etc. But when they say stuff, depending on when it is, if it's during, I've walked out of sermons, my dad's best friend preaching in our church, and I've got lost in my dad's pastoral installation. Got him and walked out because I refused to let my son listen to the toxic theology of, and the toxic and unoriginal theology of God made Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve. And I said, "Oh, that's my cue to go."
Baptist church finger.
Girl, no, I just grabbed my son. I was like, "Come on, we're going to the car." I went to the car. I text my sister and said, "Let me know when he's done so I can come back in for the installation, Sarah, the liturgy and the charge and all that. Let me know when to come back in for that. But I'm not going to listen to this sermon because that's harmful. And I just refuse to let my son grow up listening to that. Because then he has to undo the stuff that I'm not teaching him, the stuff that I had to work to undo. And that's work I don't want to have to do, because why?" So I've had that response. I've just openly challenged harmful things, like if it's in Bible study, for instance. When it's my turn to teach, I teach what I'm going to teach. I'm not given a lesson to teach. I'm told to teach what I want to teach. And so I do. And usually that's from a womanist perspective. That's, I took womanist midrash into Bible study and started in the beginning. And I made a whole bunch of people mad. And because the first womanist midrash by Dr. Will Gaffney, the very first chapter, she starts with Genesis 1:1, and she uses a feminine pronoun for the Spirit. And we old school Baptists, and I made people mad. Like, I made them real mad, and I don't care. Like, I mean, I care to an extent, but I also don't care, because I'm going to be me, but two, people deserve to be exposed, and we owe it to people to expose them to something bigger than the misogyny and the patriarchy and the homophobia that is so prevalent. So we deserve to at least expose them to it, to show them that there are people who are struggling with this, or who have with the theology, or who have, like, forget struggle, who have studied and found that theology lacking, and have come up with something better, something different, something more inclusive, something more godly, in my opinion, in my theological whatever I have. I'm losing my words here.
No, I get it.
But so that's I do that. And then just this last week, my dad, we were having Bible study on Romans 13. God put all governments in place and whatnot, blah blah blah. Respect, even if we don't like them, we have to respect them, of the government officials. And I was like, no.
That's not what Jesus did.
I was like, where? Right, exactly. So, and we went there, and and then he even brought up, like, well, Martin Luther King respected authority. I said, but how? And he said, well, and he said he knew the consequences of his actions. I said, right, but he chose to take them. He chose to do it anyway. And so, and the consequence, he chose to do it even unto death. Like, not that he wanted to die, not that he was saying, yes, please kill me. He knew that it was a possibility, and he still chose to do the work to try to free people. But at the end of the day, that wasn't out of respect for the government. That wasn't respect for the laws. It was an active breaking of them. That's the ultimate disrespect, saying, I know what you said and I ain't gonna do it. So that's disrespecting, whether or not you have to be like, yes, we all have to deal with the consequences, whether they're just or not, but we have to choose between what is just and what is lawful and what is just sometimes. And so, so that's kind of where, but so that's what I do. I'm like, no. So, but don't do what I do, y'all. Don't listen to me, because it'll get you in trouble.
No, I think what you said, you actually said a lot of stuff that actually is very good. In the sessions that I've taught, because I've taught a number of sessions where, like, teach people how to do digital organizing, respond to messages and things like that. And what you actually are saying, without saying it, is that you took an assessment of your power, your ability, your relationships, and you acted accordingly. And that's one thing that I've taught people to do, is that, okay, you have to like do like a mapping of what you're capable of. What you said was like, hey, I'm a minister. My daddy's a minister. You realize where you have pull, where you have power, and where you don't, and you exercise your authority. So maybe for you in this situation, basically boycotting your daddy, holding up a sign during service wouldn't work. But when you have your Bible study, you do what you do, and it's very clear where you stand, and that is something. I think when we ask people, I know for me particularly, when I ask people to do more, it doesn't mean to put yourself in undue risk and undue harm. Well, let me say it differently. We are asking people to take, I am asking people to take a risk, but we're asking people to take a reasonable risk. Take a risk that you can take that won't put you necessarily, like, I'm not asking you to get yourself killed or make yourself homeless or what have you. But look and see what you can do. Maybe your resistance is, I'm gonna leave. Maybe your resistance is, I'm not paying. Maybe you're a trustee, or maybe your auntie is a trustee. Maybe your auntie is the lesbian trustee, and you know how to talk to her. And that way there's something that they can do to put some type of thing up, like to really see where you have pull, where is there community that can back you, what type of connection relationships do you have that you can leverage to say something different. And so I think what you said, Courtney, is saying, hey, these are the roles that I inhabit. Here's the relationships that I have. Here's the power that I have, and here's how I'll use it in the best way to go for a different decision. Me yelling at my dad about this isn't going to change his mind. I can have Bible study though and bring them books that they'll never see. So that way they'll be exposed, like you're using your position to expose something different. There it is. That's it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. And to that point, my dad and I, we've been going back and forth. Like I said, he's been trying to break me of being me for a very long time, since I was a kid. Like, he literally told me that. And I mean, this was real. And I know that I'm not going to change his mind, and I know that he's not going to change mine. But the people that are there who deserve to at least, because some of them are really struggling with this, like with their own theological, like, the place they're at, and to even just expose them that there is this other way, and that it makes sense. Like, because when they're looking at the Bible and they're looking at what they've always been taught, and they can't find where they know in their hearts and in their minds that maybe that's not right, but they can't find it because they've never been taught where to look or how to think that way. So I like my change. I'm not pushing to change my dad's mind that much. I pushed him and changed it a little bit every once in a while. Like I've been able to change. My dad used to think that women shouldn't preach. Now he licensed me to preach. Like he won't ordain me. He said that women shouldn't be ordained because women shouldn't be pastors. And you don't need to be ordained unless you're going to be a pastor, according to him. So I mean, there's that, but now at least he recognizes and acknowledges that maybe women can preach a little bit. So there's some push there, and there's some, but my goal isn't to change him because he's decided where he's gonna be. My goal has been always been, and because my call isn't to change his mind. Like that's just not what God told me to do. God told me to go and preach the good news to the people. And so I do what I do for the people, and so that they can find the ways to make up their minds for themselves, to figure out those places where they're struggling, where they want something different and they don't know where to find it. And so if they just hear me speak up a little bit, then maybe because they don't have necessarily they can't say chapter verse, this is what the Bible says here and there, to kind of be completely opposite of what you're saying it says. So which I hate doing, by the way. I hate getting into the back and forth spitting of scriptures because it really doesn't it gets nowhere. But sometimes it helps people to say, oh well, maybe the Bible doesn't say what we've been saying the Bible says, because the Bible says two different things. So now I got to do a little more. But now at least I know where to start. I can go to this verse or this chapter or this book and start there. So that's but then we have the people in my dad, like people like my dad, and people, not just him, because and I hate to even single out people. I just can only talk about my contacts, but there are so many people who think they're not harmful because they don't say they have these homophobic thoughts or these misogynistic thoughts or whatever, but they don't say them out loud from the pulpit. So I'm not harmful. I'm not hurting anybody because I don't say it. But what are you doing? Will you marry gay people in your church? Like, do you do that because you'll take their money? So will you marry them? Do you think that a woman can be a minister? Can a lesbian woman minister in this church? Will you license her and allow her to preach? And can God use her to bring the word to the people? Like, it's not it's toxic theology goes past what we say, and it goes into what we do and how we live and who's being excluded and who's being whose voices are being amplified and who's being told either explicitly or implicitly that they don't matter. And so that's where I know people who say, oh well, I'm not hurting anybody, I'm not saying it, but is that what you think, and what do you do? And then it's up to us, and like I get it, and I know, and some people have to leave. It's a matter of life and death for some of us. Like, we can't stay and deal with it because people get depressed, people get PTSD. It's like, it's real. This is life and death. But those of us who can, because if everybody leaves, and generations of people who have never taught better can't do better because they don't know better. So somebody has to be willing. Those of us who can, those of us who are willing, have to be willing to stay and push against it at least a little bit. I mean, it doesn't feel good to me. I came home Wednesday and I was like in tears, and like Thursday I could barely function because of what happened after Bible study. But somebody has to stay. Like, I could just go to the UCC and be like, okay, it's all cool. Like, I can go to the UCC and like they good with me over here. But then who's gonna change the Baptists? So
I've been to Portland, Maine a lot this year. I know it's really But the last time I was there, I had to lead a brick tour. So in Portland, Maine, which is they have an art project, and there are bricks that commemorate different activities like past, present, and future that that community members have submitted, like it's stories, life events, and different things like that. So there is one brick from the Catholic Church, and I can't remember exactly what it's called, but I can't even remember the woman's name, but it's like so and so stood. And it is a brick that commemorates, like, she was sitting in this Catholic church. The priest was preaching a homophobic message about Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve. And she stood up and turned her back because she didn't want, I want to say, if I'm remembering this correctly, she didn't want her kids to think that what she was hearing was okay. So she spent the entire sermon with her back turned towards the priest. And because it was this big church and she's a short lady, she didn't think anyone had ever even noticed her. No one reacted to what she did. Years later, she was door knocking, canvassing in support of gay marriage in Maine. I think they passed a state bill before the Supreme Court declared it legally federally. So she was door knocking and part of the organizing campaign around this, and she was telling her story, and someone said, "You're the woman who stood up in the cathedral. We've been talking about you." So it's things like that where she recognized her power, like Verdell said. She used what she saw was little power, but people saw her and they noticed even when she didn't think, and it made a difference in the long term. And that's what I think of when we talk about, like, what can we do from the pulpit as far as challenging the toxic theology.
Yeah, I agree.
I'm trying to think. Is there anything else? I had another question, but I forgot. I lost it. So, is there anything else that you?
Well, I guess we gotta talk about the actual the main event.
The main event. Woo! Let me pour more wine, Verdell. Escort us into the main event. Let's go.
So the main event actually has a few things. Is Jasper Williams, is he a bishop of something?
So, okay, here's the thing. I had never heard of Jasper Williams before.
Me neither. And he's old.
He's old school.
That he's like a giant. In the Christian theological world, and like this great and respected preacher. So I heard that, and I was really looking forward to things.
I mean, this was. Well, so I will tell you my estimation, and as I watched it today, this took it to my mind. I wonder if he thought this was his moment, because the way he approached it, it was like somebody who was trying to give their trying to give their platform speech or whatever, you know, trying to be, because I didn't know. I feel like you have to really, like, I didn't know who he was, you know. Never heard of him before. And so I was wondering, just by hearing talking, I was like, is this like his platform? It's like, is this him trying to get out his stuff, you know, his viewpoints, try to be out there, to be known and visible? Like, this is his moment. But that's...
Is he retired? Because I heard social media rumblings. I'm going to be honest, I haven't Googled to double check, but someone said that he's retired now, and like, which made performance all that much more interesting.
I mean, he wasn't. I mean, he's old for sure. He's like into his 70s. So I mean, he may have retired from pastoring his church. I doubt that he stopped preaching, even if he's not pastoring anymore.
What makes him amazing? I'm just confused. I watched it. I don't mean to be shady. I'm not. Maybe it's inherently shady to even ask the question. and that could be
with him before the funeral, though, right?
I've heard of him. So like my grandfather, I'm a 5th generation preacher, so I've been like really I grew up like my church was my whole life. We were in church like 4 or 5 days a week. On Sunday, it was an all day affair. Like we went to 3 services. So I'm definitely like I've heard of him. My grandfather was like Clay Evans and like all those people. Those were his friends. Um, so I'm familiar with him and I'm familiar with his brand of preaching.
Is it
And
always like what we heard?
I, I mean, yeah, and here's the thing: it's not just him, right? I don't. That's why I don't want to put it on him. It's not just him. I've heard that sermon, if we
Yes.
want to call it that, 1,000 times throughout my
Yes, a
life in
thousand
some form or
times.
another from 1,000 different mouths.
Mhm.
So, and they're still doing it. The Baptist General, the National Baptist Convention is going on right now. Right now, somebody is up preaching late night, and they preaching that same sermon. I can guarantee it.
Yeah, I think that's really the
um,
point to drive home is that it is something that I said in the past about other situations, but I think it applies to this too, is that I think it's good to use these moments to highlight what's wrong because it's visible and people can visibly see it.
right.
However, this is what people are preaching across the country. And for
Hmm.
every TD Jakes, for every Jasper Williams we take out, there's 50 million others who are saying the same thing in their churches. And
So
Right.
so to make it just about the big, I mean, yeah, like what they're saying when they're saying it's wrong, but it's more indicative of the culture that they emerge from
Hmm.
than the fact that, oh, well, if we just drag um, if we just drag Jamal Bryant enough, then it'll be better. No, it won't.
so so when I hear people saying talking about toxic theology, and my response is not my church, is that not a fair response?
No, it's silly. It's stupid, and it's because when if this is the thing though, it's like I really want for, and it's I had to go to this point too. I would like for our wokeness. Oh, I hate that word. I would like for our level of consciousness to expand beyond just what plagues me, because these things are all interconnected. And
Hmm.
this has been my issue with a lot of progressive religious stuff, particularly the progressive religious Christian stuff that in the Black community, if you can even call it progressive,
Mm.
is that a lot of it is very much like it's cool to rep your set. Like it's communities that we will go hard for. And I think that's fine. You know what I mean? I think there's nothing wrong with that. However, it gets to a point where if we can't make it about our set, if we can't make it about our team, then it somehow doesn't count. And I think that's where it gets problematic. Because, like, okay, listen, like, yeah, it's true. If it's gay teens somewhere, I'm gonna go hard for them, and if they got something, I'm gonna give them my stuff, my limited stuff. But it doesn't mean that everything else happening around me is negated or into like poverty and issues with the school system and climate change and all these things are interconnected and they impact everybody.
Hmm.
And so I think that at some point we have to start saying, yes, the reason why a TD Jakes or whoever else or Purple Dollar says these things is because they emerge from a culture that where these things are okay. And for and just because you like these creatures are the fruits, but they're not the root. And
Mm.
Right.
and until we're willing to really sit with the fact that this is what is said across pulpits every day, you know. Even I don't know we can talk about it yet, but even the fact that that old boy was able to reach and touch for Ariana the way that he did,
Mhm. Mhm.
and the fact that he probably wasn't even thinking nothing of it. He more
Right.
than
Right.
likely was not thinking, "Oh, let me go ahead, whatever." Just the fact that it seemed to be normal to do in the situation tells you that this is common for people just to reach around and touch it. Even the way, and it's implicit. It's like, hey, turn around and tell your neighbor, go around and give your neighbor a
Well,
hug, go hug
Right.
3 people. Like we don't the idea of bodily autonomy and no, you can't just touch people because they're here is
Right.
something that we don't really talk about. Like
Right.
go hug your uncle. Go give your auntie a kiss. It's a command. It's not a question. You know what I mean? And so until we're willing to really address the deep-seated issues that religion helps us perpetuate, we're going to be having these conversations. We're going to, like, it happens all the time. Someone says something reckless or stupid, and we type and we get mad and we fuss and we fight, myself included. You know what I mean? But ultimately, until these people are either forced to change some way, somehow, or forced to be removed, we're just going to be talking. And it doesn't negate the work that people are doing to make things a difference. We're talking about, let's say, an AME church changing, or a National Baptist changing. Somebody has to flip a table, figuratively speaking. Maybe even literally too, if they want. I'm not going to be opposed because people are dying, so I don't care. But it's not just going to be, listen, Jamal Bryant's not reading your blog, and if he did, it's not going to make a difference. I wrote a blog about somebody, about what they did, and I tried to be very fair in the blog. They read it. We had a conversation. He still has not changed. That was years ago.
You don't have to say it on air, but
I'm not going to say it. I'm not going to be that messy.
You to tell me who that is. I am.
Yeah, but I've seen these people up close enough to be able to. The reason why, I won't say that I am hopeless, but the reason why I'm so like, look, you borderline have to fight these folks. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you borderline, like, they are not interested in changing, because to really make these places a healthy, safe space would mean to upend the way things are done in a significant way, which means that the power dynamics will be totally flip-flopped. And they don't want that. And that's the reality. It's to be able to do that means also to challenge our aunties and our uncles and our daddies and our aunties, and to be able to look them in the face and tell them, no, you're wrong. This needs to change. And we'll either leave or take it from you to make it better.
And you know what? I've had some hard conversations with, like, my grandmother is the churchiest person I know. And I remember we had a conversation around suicide. And she just firmly believed that if you commit suicide, you're going to hell. And I was just like, how does that make sense? Like, why would God see someone who was hurt, broken, and sick and couldn't see a way into continuing to live this life, and then punish them eternally for, like, having a mental illness or just being so broken that they couldn't continue? How are you okay with that being the God that you serve? And I remember she got so mad at me, she told me to shut up and get out her face.
But you know what, with that example though, look, and this isn't I'm not excusing at all, but think about folks from our generation where you aren't allowed to be weak. You aren't allowed to show any of those things. And so to the point where you got to find a way to make it through. And so to her and people in that generation is that they weren't allowed to talk about being depression. What's that? Being sad. What's that? And so they theologically made a way to deal with that, you know?
That is interesting because my grandmother suffered with depression a lot, but she would not acknowledge it because growing up, that meant you were crazy, and they put you in the crazy house.
They put you in the crazy home.
And it was this disconnect. So I think a lot of it was her faith and her praying and crying and, like, struggling through this ongoing depression was because she couldn't acknowledge that if I go to the doctor, I can get help for this, because that meant something completely different to her than what I had to learn it meant for me, because I wasn't always as open and woke and conscious when it comes to mental illness. But it's harder for her because she had a completely different lived experience around mental illness in her generation. So that is a great and valid point.
It doesn't make her right, or it doesn't make it safe. It's just, I think, realizing the context of these things allows us to handle it in a way. It's like, look, this is all, it's not an excuse, but it's like, this is all they had to work through. They didn't have the option. There was no talk space. There wasn't, there wasn't no open source therapy. It wasn't none of that. They just had to figure out a way to make it through, because people had to eat, people had to have a roof over their head, whatever. And so it's to realize, it's still dangerous, it's still hurtful and harmful, but to
Mm-hmm.
put that in a packet, and that's why I like Courtney's approach, because it's like, and it's in my view, I think there is wisdom in the story about the Israelites in the wilderness for 40 years. I think there's wisdom there. God, because ultimately these folks had to die because they weren't getting it. And I'm not advocating. I'm not advocating sending poisonous snakes through the congregation to kill people or whatever. But
I think I might just drop off a couple of snakes.
I'm not advocating for that. However, I think it, and I think what Courtney said is such wisdom there, because like, look, my daddy's not going to change. My uncle's not going to change. What I can do though is talk to the Calebs and the Joshuas that are over here, because they're receptive. So that one day when the other folks, when inevitably they do get up out of here, we can make. I can't do anything with the old folks, but I can help the babies to see something different. I can help the folks with something different, and then maybe I can seed the cloud so that one day when it rains, it's something better. And I think that again is really helpful, because it's just that we've been yelling at. We can make a list of the same folks that we have been yelling at literally for the better part of a decade, because we've all known each other for a long time, or been aware of each other, on Terra Summit for a long time. The majority of these people have not moved significantly in one way or another. And so, the fact is that, like I said, even with Jasper Williams, he probably was not thinking anything predatory about touching Ariana the way that he did.
Ellis.
Yeah, that was Ellis.
Oh, Ellis? Who's Ellis?
So it was his church that the funeral was at.
Okay. Wait, I'm confused. Am I confusing terms? I'm confused something. Okay.
There were two ministers. The officiating minister was, I can't think of his first name, but Bishop
Carl.
Wait, Delano?
No, it's not Carl. No, not Delano. I don't know. Is it Carl Ellis? I don't know. It's something Ellis.
Yeah, it's Ellis. I can't remember his first name, but
I'm confusing people.
His church was where the funeral was, and he was the one who grabbed Ariana Grande.
Okay.
And then in his apology, he said he may have crossed the border, which was complicated because he had also made the Taco Bell joke, and that is even more complex because
God,
not Hispanic, of Italian origin. So it was like,
Italian. I was like, is anyone going to tell him she's Italian?
Like just punch after punch. And then he had this whole ageist thing going where he was happy he didn't have gray hair, and he pulled Smokey Robinson up and made him just as uncomfortable somehow as he made Ariana. It was just weird, and I just wanted him to stop talking, but he kept.
And that's the thing, nobody's talking about that because it's easy to say this: the black man assaulted the white girl. But not that he was ageist towards the older black man. Like it's easy to make the white girl the victim. Yeah, and that's why I refuse to even engage in that, because one, we're not gonna make the white girl the victim in a black church space where black women have been. And I'm not even gonna say that Bishop Ellis did it on purpose, because I don't know his intention, and two, I've hugged people and accidentally touched them in places that so. I'm not gonna say he did it on purpose, but the assumption that it was okay to hug her is what we have to talk about. But I'm not gonna make the white girl the face of it. I'm just not.
I think for me in that situation, because it like literally happened to her, yeah. But then on the wider picture, if he was okay doing that to her in that space, imagine what else is okay. And I think that's the point. It's like it literally happened to Ariana, so I'm okay with what happened to her. So I do hear your point, but I think it just goes to your point though, that if it was just, and again, like let's assume that he wasn't trying anything or doing anything, whatever. But if it could happen to her in that space, imagine what happens to the black women who were there. And I think that I think to me was the big point. It's like, look at what he was comfortable doing with international cameras on him. Look at what he was comfortable doing. And so that should tell you that to me is a tell about what else is okay in that space. Because nobody would have said nothing about it had it not been the outcry from everybody else. Because that's normal.
You know what?
Right.
I think y'all are both right. That is normal in church space. And what started the conversation was unchurched people saying, no, this is not okay. It is not okay for you to invade someone's space who you don't know, you have no relationship with. You say this, you announce that you don't know who she is as you are grabbing her. And to see the look on her face, I think it's...
She was just like, what? What is happening?
Right. That unchurched
anyway, like, period. She was confused before she got there because she
was
confused. She didn't know what was going on.
Right.
Just like Smokey Robinson was confused when he called him. But
right.
I think it's interesting that it took unchurched people to come to get a view into church culture and say, no, this is not okay.
So,
and then we heard, and then what I saw at least was a lot of people who had grown up in church and been in church all their lives talk about how uncomfortable it has been to have to hug people and how they have felt violated in church spaces when they are giving these church hugs.
Mm-hmm. So I think for me, the danger is in saying, the people who are saying, oh, look, we need to talk about this, as though no one's been talking about it. Just because you're unaware of the conversation, I saw, and I don't want to take someone's words, even though it's a sentiment, it's a common sentiment, but someone said it on Twitter, and I saw the tweet, so I don't know who it was, but I don't want to take the words. Just because you're unaware that the conversation has been going on doesn't mean it hasn't been. Some of us have been talking about this for a while, and so, like, on the one hand, yes, let's talk about what happened specifically to this one person, but let's not make it about her. Let's use that as a jumping off point to then have the conversations that we have been having, and we've been having them. Like, let's not make the mistake to think that we haven't been, because people have been talking about this assumed touching for a long time. Some people don't want to be touched. Like, during flu season, I don't want to be touched. Don't touch me because you might be sick. Like, I'm a hugger. Like, I'm okay with that. But during flu season, look, it's 20 people in the church, and I don't want to hug all y'all because some of y'all might be sick, and then I'm gonna be sick for a week, or my son will get it, then I'm gonna get it, then I got to deal with it for another 2 weeks. And so,
especially when Galatians chapter 5 verse 15 or whatever is your flu shot.
Right. So, but the for me, it's always like, how can we use this occurrence to talk about the wider culture and to critique the wider culture? And my problem is with the unchurched people and the, not just the unchurched people, but the unchurched white folks that are coming in that are saying, well, why was he hugging her anyway? Well, because we hugged, and like he said, he hugged everybody, and he did. And whether or not it's okay for him to assume that he can hug everybody that came across that stage is something that it's up to us to critique. But I don't feel comfortable letting, like, these white women who get outraged online and the white men that want to defend the white girl be the ones that drive that conversation. So, because
it's
not theirs.
This is at the intersection of, like, racism and misogyny, or that often comes up when I'm
right.
When I was at Benihana's that Saturday, sitting with a family of white people who we did not want to sit with, because I was spoiled.
Let's talk about autonomy and, like, I didn't. How they make you sit with strangers.
So here's the thing. I was spoiled. Like, there is I think I'm not sure. Up the street there is a Japanese, like, hibachi steakhouse that I don't know if family owned or not, but it's like actual Asian people who are running it and all that type of stuff. And so, but I've never been to Benihana's, and so we said, oh, let me go. I haven't went. And so we went out, and at the one that I'm used to going to, you can actually get a table on your own. You don't have to sit at the grill. You don't have to get the whole show. You can sit somewhere else. And so
that show pisses me off 95% of the time.
When I was 15, it was amazing. When I was 13 and haven't been nowhere, the flaming onion, the little oil in the volcano was amazing. However, I am now about to be 35 years old. I'm not impressed anymore. I just want to eat and be left alone. And so it says next to these people, and they were very, very, like, they were very talking, very chatty. And I mentioned something, to my partner who was there and was talking about, like, whatever. And the people were there like, yeah, we saw that. It was really disturbing. You know what I mean? Like, and so I felt uncomfortable too. They didn't say anything to overstep like that racial boundary.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing what they're saying is like, oh yeah, it felt uncomfortable to see him do that. Well, yeah, we all are saying we agree with that, right?
Right.
It's true.
Right.
But at the same time, it still feels strange that it's like y'all are white.
Because you don't know if you're saying it felt uncomfortable for a man to do this to a woman or for a black man to be. Yeah.
Right.
They didn't say like, oh, well, like their general expression was like, what they said was like, oh yeah, on the basic level, I agree with you. It's just not a conversation I want to have with you.
No.
Right.
And there is historical context behind that makes it a more complicated conversation to have interracial. When you're talking,
like, it's very wrong that though it's wrong how he did it. I just think that if you are talking, like if I'm talking to white folks, we have other conversations to have that I want you to be more focused on. Let us,
right.
And like Courtney said, people are. I think the issue is, and people say all the time, like, "Oh, why isn't anyone talking about this?" Whatever. And I think to Courtney's point, like people are talking about it. I think the issue though is that these conversations are not taking the traction that we think that they are. And I think that's really more the issue. Not that people aren't doing the work. It's just that where they aren't happening in places where it can impact the everyday situations. They're happening on Twitter. They're happening at so-and-so academic conference.
We feel like Twitter is like this big, it's our platform to screen to the world, but Twitter is really a bubble where we are talking to each other.
And there is utility in preaching to the choir because you have to practice, right? As my preaching Aunt Leslie would say. That's not my phrase.
Look at you giving credit where credit is.
Yeah, I didn't make. I mean, people do it on Twitter all the time. It's like all of a sudden you write something, all of a sudden you see a blog post or some type of other podcast. You're like, wait a minute, where did you get that? You're not that creative.
Can we talk about? You know what? I've been drinking. I just want to say that there are some people that have larger platforms that do take things that they see that other people say on a very regular basis, because it's happened to me, and I'll be like, wait. But
it's not just a simple similarity, right? It's not just a simple like, oh, well, we think so. It's
literally like, verbatim.
Yeah, word for word. Where it's like, wait a minute, did you actually? If you run this through Turnitin, I'm sure it will tell you that you didn't make this up.
Right. Highlighted.
So much.
But like, that's real though. That's a thing.
I want to go backwards for a second. There was a question on Twitter from Tony. And he said, going back to your sponge analogy, Verdell, he said, interesting analogy. But is religion the sponge and us the liquid, or vice versa? In the sense that we are what absorbs religion. Either way, it seems as if religion is a tool by which justification is formed.
Religion, this is me thinking off the top of my head. If you talk to me again a few years from now, I might say differently. I think that it's a two-way street. I think religion is justification, period. Overall, in general, I think just looking at religion and what the purpose that it served is to justify, to make sense of, to make meaning of. And I think it's a cyclical thing. It's like I think at some point you can't really, that's why all the metaphors kind of fall short, because it could be, you might learn that gay people are bad from going to church. You know what I mean? And even, it's a two-way street, but I think the idea is more to look at ourselves, because even the idea of religion comes from people. And so it's to really realize that, okay, this religion thing is something that people have made up, and we can use religion to better society, to encourage healthier ideas and healthier society. We can make that decision. It's not like religion fell out of the sky. This is what we need to make it in order for it to work. That religion is a totally, entirely person-created thing. what we ascribe to that, like, oh, God did this, whatever. Okay, fine. But religion itself, like you can even say, even though I don't personally believe this, but I think you could say religion is our way of making sense of what we believe the divine to be. Whatever the divine is, this is our way of making sense of it. And so because it's our way of making sense of it, we can make sense of it in a way that doesn't actually hurt us or other people. We can make that decision. And so that decision lies on us. And so I think that's the thing. I think it can, the sponge analogy, I mean, I'm saying this because I want to be charitable, because I am no longer a Christian and I don't believe anything supernatural. And so I'm trying to be charitable in my responses. For me personally, it's like, oh yeah, most of this is bad. More than, if this is a loaf of bread and it's like 20 slices, about 15 of them are moldy. And so, and so we should probably throw out most of the loaf or eat something else because it keeps getting moldy. That's me. But I think if you are still religious in that way and believe in God, I think the idea that we can make something different is that these ideas, it's a cross-pollination, I guess is a better way to put it. It's like we're impacted by the religious ideas that we receive. And in turn, we're able to impact the religion that's given to us. And I think that latter power is not used as often because we think it's about tradition. This is what my nana did and my mama did. But the reality is that that's not how religion ever works. Religion has always changed, particularly Christianity. That's why it's still here. It's been able to absorb the things around it like a sponge, but still be a sponge. It's able to, like Christmas and all these other holidays and music and everything else. It's been able to absorb things, but still keep what makes it Christianity. That's not true. But it's still been able to maintain some of its, like the sponge does not, even though the sponge is soaked up with orange juice or water or bleach, it's still a sponge. And I think that's why Christianity has been able to survive, and that people who are faithful can also do that. It's like it can still be the thing that it is while being something much better and healthier for everybody else.
So about a year ago, my first week of seminary, the first thing we were assigned in my Hebrew Bible class was to read Genesis chapters 1 through 11, which they set me up for the okie doke because I thought, oh, we're only going to have to read a couple of chapters every week. But then it became, no, you're going to read this whole book in a week. And I am tired of reading the Bible. And my mom was like, shut up, don't say that. I was like, no. I have to read Exodus in 2 days. I am over it.
Isn't it exhausting? You get tired. It's like, I'm getting tired of all these numbers. Right. And all these names. I don't care. I'm
gonna tell you the truth. I skip through the genealogies like I do. I'm like,
you know what? So here's
okay, let me start reading again.
I read the genealogies. I was like, this is gonna mean something. And then I got to the commentary and they were like, yeah, there's no way to prove this. They just made up these names to tell a story. And I was like, what the hell did I just read all of these baguettes?
Yeah, I skip through every single one because it's like, so when you take the Hebrew Bible, especially as the context of this is the story of how this nation came to be, this is the story of our history, then I'm like, okay, somehow y'all got here and now we're here.
What was interesting, I was reading the Harper Collins Study Bible, and I read the introduction of Genesis, and on that first page it said, none of this can be proven as fact. This is basically an ancient people trying to make sense of the world they live in. And that was the most jarring and the most reassuring thing that I think I've read in seminary thus far, because it makes sense. Like, this doesn't have to be the way it happened. These are just like ancient people, pre-science people, trying to make sense of the world that they live in. And what that did was it freed me from saying this is the way things have to be. Because we have so much more cultural and historical and scientific context that we can see a different God than just what was in Genesis, just a snake talking to Eve in the Bible and women being evil based on the fact that Eve ate the apple, you know? Like,
yeah, they were trying to explain, like, think about it. Like, I think the best way I like to explain it was, like, and even like the first chapter, it's a poem, but in English you can't tell.
Mm-hmm.
You know that it's a poem, but it's a poem. And I mean, think about it. If you were a people who lived in the desert and you were trying to figure out, well, why is life so hard? Why does, half the children we give birth to, why do they die?
Right.
Why is it so hard to grow a plant? Why do we live in here in the hills? Well, once upon a time, things were much better, but somebody made a mistake, and now life is hard. We have to work. It's how, and the way that we think of life, like even the most fundamentalist of us, we tend to approach life in a way that science is normal. Like we just assume that certain things work. And that way of viewing the world is only about 200 years old. So for most of human history, people thought the way they did in the Bible. You know what I mean? And so to realize that it's like they weren't trying to prove, like we're asking often things from the text. We're asking questions that weren't their questions. They didn't care about science. What they wanted to do is to tell, how did they explain things back in the day? They told a story. And they told a myth. And to us, myth means lie. You know what I mean? And sometimes it is a lie. Sometimes it is a lie. But the idea of myth isn't automatically evil. A myth is a story that carries some type of idea or truth. The story itself is not true, like Santa Claus. The story itself is not supposed to be true. The details about some man dropping off gifts, the whole point is to talk about the generosity of the Christmas spirit. But if you're looking for facts, you're going to miss that.
And I think that's the delineation that I always try to make anytime I'm teaching, preaching, whatever, is that something can be not factual and still be true. Right. And making that delineation between fact and truth is really important. Even like in Bible study, when people are saying, well, if this didn't really happen, then I should throw out the Bible. No, find the truth in it, even if there's no fact.
Yeah,
like
you
don't have to throw it all away.
Principles or lessons that you can take from this story and still appreciate the biblical literature for what it provides.
Right. It wasn't about, because they weren't trying to, even our idea of facts is recent history. And so it's just this idea of like, and also I'm not taking healthcare advice from somebody who lived 2,000 years ago. I'm just not going to do it.
Are you telling me you're not praying away the flu shot and you're going to get like you're not, you don't have the faith to combat measles?
No, because they probably had measles and died. So no, I'm not. I don't know. No. But I think just even getting back to the whole situation with that, I think for me, I don't know how you guys feel about this, but I think that this one was maybe a little bit different because it was so public, the situation. This was, again, a window into like kind of Black church stuff. But from what I saw on social media, it was a lot of people who were saying, I love the music. I like everything else about the church. I have a lot of these same beliefs, but this sermon is why I don't go. And it seemed like a lot of people were kind of saying that, but then some of the progressive Christian folk were overlooking that. It kind of making it not a big deal, which is why I think ultimately, I'm talking about generally speaking, I don't have much faith in things changing. Maybe in spots and pockets here and there, but like generally speaking, no, because I think that from my experience with it all, people love it to the point where they're not willing to challenge it. To the point because they don't want to shake the boat. They only want to shake the boat so that way they can play. But they don't want to change the rules so that everybody can play. And this idea that people really think that the progressive bubble, like you mentioned, Kia, that the way it is on Twitter and it may be in your little in someone's little blog comments or that one little meeting y'all had that one day, that's the way it is everywhere, and it's not. And I think that that's something that people continue to struggle with. It's like, no, this is not it. This
Mm-hmm.
idea of the Black church as it's only a half step away from being the progressive force that it once was. For one, it never really was that. And two, we're not that now. We're probably asking to go back to a time that's never really truly existed.
Right.
And I think that's the part where people struggle with this, like this idea, like even with civil rights, is like this idea that every Black church was hitting the pavement. And it's like, no, they weren't.
Mm-hmm.
They really weren't. And it's
Right.
just we have a really romanticized view of what the Black church is. And a lot of what we do is based off what we would like to see it be. But we're asking it to become something that it honestly never truly was.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the heart. And pockets, sure. Like, I mean, I'm talking generally speaking. I'm not trying to denigrate the things that I know that are there. But largely speaking, what Jasper Williams was saying over the pulpit is like Courtney said, that we count. I need everybody's hands and fingers in my building to count how many people believe that sermon.
Mm-hmm.
Like he's preaching something that a lot of people believe.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And so this idea that we're just one more expensive conference away from it all being better, without realizing that we probably, in order to change this thing, to use building cover, because we already have to gut this thing out and start from scratch. And maybe not from scratch, but like the rot is worse than we think. And it was actually built into the system in the first place. It's not a matter of tweaking it to get it back to what it once was. The Black church has never been a place that was fully, of course, in its subversive ways, sure, but in the ways that we're asking for, the Black church has never been that affirming of women in that way. It has never been affirming of queer people. It has never been a place, like we're talking about generally speaking here, of course, like just this romanticized view of the Black church being this banner of justice in pockets, sure, but overall, as if it's our shared heritage, the evidence is coming up short. And I think that's the thing, is that we confuse our progressive bubble as the norm when history is like, where?
Right.
It's interesting because in the beginning of Aretha's funeral, before we were like, ooh, toxic, bad, I saw two questions that popped up. One was, and they were like your normal Twitter question. One was like, what's the most problematic thing that you're a fan of? Did y'all hear that? I'm sorry, I have my computer set up.
Oh, I was scared. I was like, what is that?
What's happening?
I was like, I've never heard that before.
So here's the funny thing. I work from home and we do a lot of video meetings, and my computer always announces the time, and they're like, okay, Kia is telling us the end now. Yeah, it announces the time on the hour and on the half hour. So,
oh goodness, I thought it was over.
The rapture was happening.
I was like, I've never heard that before. It is time to quit.
Yeah. So, one question was like, what is the most problematic thing that you're a fan of? And someone answered the Bible, and I was like, yes, that. And another tweet that I saw was someone said that, what was it? Hold on. Wine is getting to me. It was about the Black church being, someone said the Black church was, someone said something negative, and the response was the Black church is a place of liberation. I don't know. Maybe they said the Black church was the most problematic thing. And a person replied, how dare you say this? The Black church is a place of liberation. And my response to that was, the Black church has freed just as many people as it has enchained. So
that's it. It can be both.
Yeah, it can be both. And I think, it's not to eliminate just for Black people, it's, again, putting the theology part aside, it's one of the few institutions, I think, between this and Black letter organizations, that is like authentically stuff that we have made that's our own. And so on the flip side, what I tell people when I have other talks about this is like, like we'll talk about people leaving religion, is that what adds an extra layer to it for Black people is that if I'm white and I leave church, yes, it's very hard and traumatic, but wider society is still available to me.
Right,
We can't even go to
right.
Starbucks. And so me leaving church isn't just me severing from toxic theology. It's me severing myself from one of the few places where I can go or be around Black people. You know, it's the safest place.
Community and culture.
Right,
Like, right. And it doesn't mean that it's even safe. It's just the safest option.
Safest.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's like I got to go to work with people and code switch all week and deal with all that BS. Well, I can go and see Sister Hattie on Sunday and be treated with some type of respect, you know, on Sunday evening. And that's still, as problematic as that is, that's more than I'm going to get at Starbucks or at the red light when my tail light is out or somewhere else. And so it's that cultural piece where it's like, it's a reason why this thing sticks. And so, but it, like you said, both can be true. There are people who feel liberation there, but the fact that we make it seem as if liberation is the default, when those things have cut both ways, offer that at the same time, I think that's the issue. It's about troubling the narrative that it's just the Black church is this place where everybody gets set free, and it's like, no, people are usually put in chains. People are being set free and imprisoned literally simultaneously.
Right.
And to negate,
the same person.
Yes, like, the same person.
It's not that there's this group, one group is set free and one group is liberated, which also happens because there are people that are completely empowered and people that are completely disempowered. But then there are the people that are feeling both, that are feeling some aspects of liberation and also some aspects of imprisonment. And so, like, it's this really conflicting space that hurts and helps, and we have to deal with that. We can't deal with it until we admit it, until we acknowledge it.
Go ahead.
Oh, that's it.
Verdell, what you said is going to stick with me for a long time, because I think that should be inspiration for us to make church safer for all Black people, knowing that this, like, the Black church is the safest space that we experience in America, should make us more active in ensuring that all people, all Black people, all people in general, but specifically all Black people, can come into this space. Damn, this wine is good. And feel loved and accepted and affirmed, because they don't feel that in the greater world that is America.
Yeah, I mean, how can
America under Trump?
Yeah, but how can you? I mean, I think that's the thing, and this is why I get in trouble, because it's, yes, all the stories about the goodness and the inspiration, and this is where I learned to do public speaking and all the personal mentoring, all that stuff is true. At the same time, how can we push the narrative that this is the safe place, this is the place of liberation? The children that are, it's not just the Catholic Church that's abusing children. You know what I mean? Between that and the misogyny and the homophobia and the transphobia, and let's not forget about the poor people. We don't really like poor people.
We don't.
You know what I mean? We don't like poor people at all.
It's their fault that they're poor, and if they're tithes and give us more money, then they won't be poor anymore.
And so, how can we say just we can acknowledge it's okay to say, hey, listen, I experienced good things here. I learned good things here. There are times when I personally felt safe here. I don't want to take away anyone's story. My concern is that we eliminate all other stories and make it seem as if the Black church is like this safe haven for everyone to be, when literally for so many Black people, it's the worst place. They did not want to be there. They were dragged there. They don't, like, you know what I mean? And they're trying to, people are trying to recover from being there. And I think that's in order to really make it be a better place, you have to hold all of that. Sure, and I'm not going to negate your time when you did the Easter speech. Sure, go for it. But people are literally being like run over, oppressed, destroyed, dying, killing themselves because of what they've learned here. And if,
we romanticize being dragged to church and make it seem like, this cultural practice and this thing that is so kind of like we romanticize like being whipped and all these stories that we have in common, and we can look at it and it's funny in hindsight, but
It ain't funny.
It's like the root of trauma that we still carry with us today.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's not cool. It's like, and that's the thing. It's like, it's stuff that we know now that people back in the day probably did not know or realize. But it's just, like, there are little kids who have nightmares about hell because that's what they were taught to think. Or this idea about learning about how we understand sex and our bodies and just the world around us, the way that we're taught. And again, in some ways, it makes sense. And I don't mean when I talk about this, I don't ever want to make it seem as if I'm just beating up on people, because that's never really what I want, unless it's like, okay, some people deserve to be pushed a little bit, but a lot of this is people making do with the best that they have and not having the resources to do any better, not because they didn't want to, but because society kept them from them. And so I want to always hold that in reality, but it's like, this stuff is traumatic for people, and that we have the tools and ability to do better now. It's not even about trying to beat people up. It's like even all of us said, I can easily imagine Master Williams not thinking anything of reaching around and grabbing Ariana. The problem isn't necessarily so much about what his intentions were, but that we have to understand, no. We can't just touch any old bodies because you're right next to them.
That's it.
Which is a more fruitful conversation I mean, look, I'm not opposed to a good dragon, you know me, but but in this situation, I think there are situations where the bigger thing is to talk about, okay, look, being mad at this one person, sure, use it, like Chris said, as a jumping off point, but for every Jasper Williams, there's how many more of your creepy preaching brothers who you won't talk to?
Right.
Or what about, if you're a dude who knows better, when your homeboys start talking slick, when y'all at your preacher meetings at Applebee's, because I know how those go, why won't you say anything there? You see what I mean?
Right.
That's much more fruitful than you clickety clackety, which has its place, but ultimately it's like, okay, this is great, you said this on Twitter, but when you tell your preacher / your preaching brother / fraternity LB about how he is with women, when you show your brother your blog post, then we're in business.
Right.
Type of thing.
Right. And that's kind of why the not all churches like sentiment, like just to tie it back all together. That's kind of where I have a problem with that, right? Because even though true, not all churches, right? This is very true. But for every one church for every one preacher, every one church even that isn't, just the epitome of the toxic things that we see, there's 100 that are. And for everyone where within that church community where they do everything as right as they possibly can, like out of the hundreds of those that may exist, we say not all churches, so, and you just didn't do the work to go find the church that isn't harmful. Well, that's not accessible to everybody, because I mean I can only think of a handful myself personally, and they're like far away, like they're not here. Like I can't think of a church in Chicago other than maybe Trinity, where that's safe for people.
Here's the thing. I have the same problem, and I was watching a church, and I will name names after we get off air, but I was watching a church that I was like, yes, power to the people, this is it. And then someone who had been to that church physically, because I believe Bedside Baptist here, I believe, you can get a good word via Al Gore's internet. And they were like, yeah, so they're not anti-LGBTQ, but they're also not very embracing once you get there.
Oh, I know a number of churches that are like that. I think that is the actual gag.
Right.
And I was like, shit, like this seemed like a very good church, but when you're saying that you as an LGBTQIA,
close enough, I guess. Sure.
She's like, did I get all the letters? Did I get them all?
right? Look,
Just wine.
guys, wine. Sorry. But like when you go to this church and you join this church in person and you're going through new member orientation and there are these, I don't want to say brick walls, but you know, there are these stopping points for you, how you identify, then it's like, shit, like what are y'all really doing? Y'all
listen.
Right.
Now I'm just sitting here broken.
No, go ahead, Courtney. I'm sorry.
And then even if you have a pastor, even if you have a whole preaching staff, even if like every deacon in the church is embracing and affirming, you still got the membership to deal with, right? Like as a member in the church, you're gonna go there and you're still gonna encounter people, and people are people, and they mean and they ugly, and some of the meanest, ugliest people you and find are in church spaces because that's where they have been usher. And because that's where they felt empowered and historically felt like I can, because we have so little power in this world that this is where we get our power. And so some of us don't want power, we want freedom. Right? And so we want everyone to have that freedom, but some of us don't want freedom, we want power. And so to have power, that means there has to be someone that doesn't.
That's very good.
So if I'm going to church to derive the power that I don't get anywhere else, then I have to find someone to disempower and to dehumanize and to disenfranchise. And so it's going to be the people that have historically borne the brunt of that. And so no matter, you can have the best pastor, the best preaching staff, the best deacons, the best everybody who wholeheartedly affirm and celebrate and want to embrace whatever community, whether it's women in ministry, whether it's I don't know the letters, LG, the queer community, whoever it is, you can have the leadership that wants to do this, and the members, the people that come still have to deal with the people in the pews. And that's where that's where changing a culture comes in, and that's where changing, and that's where, because I know people personally who struggle with this in their church. They try, and they're trying to be the voice of change, and they're pushing, and they still have the members to deal with. Members drive out these people that they want there, that they wholeheartedly affirm and embrace and want to love and want to show the goodness of God and want to bring the kingdom of heaven here on earth just a little bit. And they still have to find out that these things happen to people. And it's heartbreaking, and it's just as someone that's dealt with multiple sides of this, it's such a complex issue, especially when we can't get people past the need for power.
Yeah, it's like a lot of us want power, and it's understandable. I'm not opposed to power if we can use it to change society, but a lot of us want power just so we can do stuff.
Right.
And I think that's the issue. Is like, I understand being who I am. There's certain privileges and powers that I have, and so I use it to, and yes, I use it in ways that ultimately suggest that I'll have less of it, but that's the point.
Right.
But I think that's the thing, is that it's the nitty gritty, and I think Courtney made a great point about just the other realities. I know there's been several churches where the minister themselves has been like, look, I want to go in a more progressive direction. But when everything is tied to, and then I think this is a bigger picture. At least one of my things, talking about how inequitable a lot of ordination processes are for people. I go to, I feel that God has called me, so I go to seminary. I don't have any money. I rack up all these student loans, and all of a sudden I get through seminary, and then I manage to get a church job, if I get lucky, that is. and I have to pay back my loans and keep keep roof over my head. And so I want to be more inclusive, but then the trustees say, "Oh no, we're not being inclusive, nothing." And so now all of a sudden, if I talk about inclusion, well, then when I'm up for review, they're going to fire me. Then who's going to feed Johnny and Michaela? You know what I mean? And who's going to keep Sally Mae off of my back? And so it's these other things too, like these purse strings that really make a difference too. And I think that's why I say it's a bigger issue than just, you know, for every famous preacher. And again, I think it's perfect to use them as a jumping off point to have a wider conversation because of the visibility. But when it comes to actually changing the culture, the vast majority of churches are not, you know, a TD Jakes or a Creflo Dollar or Jesse Williams are not reflective of the average church-going experience. And I think that we think that they are because they're so big and grand, but they're really not. And so what about the church? Like I mean, even I live in a metropolitan area, so you have a number of quote unquote progressive churches, but even that, you know, is a challenge to get to. So if you're living somewhere, you can't just all of a sudden pick up and go somewhere else. Go where? And then progressive how? Like there are plenty of quote unquote gay churches that I think are awful. I'm just being upfront. And when I preach, I'm like, listen, if I can't tell the difference between you or somebody else on TBN, I don't care who you have sex with. It doesn't make a difference to me. It's like, okay, so you're married and your husband's in the pulpit, but you're still perpetuating all of these really terrible gender norms, you know, all these other ideas and these really. So okay, so you're gay, great, but everything else is terrible. So what's the people have been having listen, people have been having sex with one another in church forever. So not to say that it's not important for visibility, but this idea that just publicly inhabiting a identity in and of itself does not make you moral or right. And I think that's something that more of us need to kind of get hip to, is that just because you can say, oh, I'm like, you know, somebody's like, oh, I'm a black gay man, I can say whatever I want, do whatever I want because people have been mean to me. No, that actually isn't the case. Just because I'm black and gay and okay with it doesn't mean that my politics and my ideas are all okay or accurate or above critique. They're not.
Right.
Same for women and misogyny and black people and racism. Yeah, all that.
It's like, yeah, me being oppressed does not automatically make me the grand marshal of morality. You know, it's human to not want to be hurt. That's human.
Right.
You know what I mean? So but yeah, I just think that overall it's a deep cultural change. And I think what people have missed with this moment is one, the wider outcry. I saw so many people, maybe it's just my feed, but so many people saying, you know, I like the music, I like everything else, but this sermon is why I don't go. And so many people.
As someone who's been in church from like an infant to maybe 10 years ago, like every day, every week, church wasn't even an option. Like the idea of not going to church didn't make sense in my mind until maybe 10 years ago. That is exactly what I said. This sermon is why I don't go.
But people ignore that. And so what the problem is, and this is why I think the black church is going to be on the back foot for a long time, because they, you know, let's pay a consultant. Let's have a conversation. Why aren't millennials coming? Because we don't like what you preach. Oh, you want more music? We don't like what you preach. Oh, you know, maybe we need to make sure of services. Y'all are homophobic. Oh, I know. We'll have a game night. No, it's because you're misogynist. Oh, well, maybe you need to. Yeah, it's like we keep telling like
let me put on skinny jeans and get in the
yeah, it's like we don't like how you talk about other people. Oh, I know, we'll have dress down day. Y'all talk about people, y'all don't really deal with poverty. Oh, what is it? It's just on like it's there, but they refuse to. And this is me coming again out of this state. To be fair, this is the person who does not believe in supernatural thing anymore. I think it's a very human thing to defend yourself against irrelevance. And if the church changes significantly in a way that is helpful, many people, progressive and not, will no longer be important in the same way. What will we do when the thing actually, if it improves, what will I write about? What will I be on a panel about? What will I have a PhD program about? What will I be the famous person about? If things actually get better for everybody and not just for my one corner of the world. And, you know, if we talk about the things about even challenging a pastor or making things different, well, then what do? People are the people. If there's no church, they don't have nothing. That's all they got.
Mm-hmm.
You know, for many people, particularly people in ministry, which is unfortunate, I think. And, you know, and so I think that's that very human response where it's like, well, wait a minute, if this thing to really do the true work and beyond reform and really changing it to make it something that's healthy and equitable means that a lot of people who are notable, you're no longer notable.
Right.
You have to be like everybody else. And that goes for progressive folks too.
Mm-hmm. I think that's kind of almost with every vocation, with every profession. When you do your work right, you
preach
it's no longer necessary.
Yeah.
It's no longer necessary. And some of us want to be needed. And that's a problem. And we have to deal with that. That's real. Like and the thing is, none of us really have to worry about it because the change is so like I wish it could change overnight, but it can't. Like I'm gonna be realistic because we can be hopeful, but we have to also be practical. And so like none of us that are doing it now have to worry. Maybe when we're 60 and ready to retire anyway, maybe I'm no longer gonna be able to say the things I'm saying. I don't have these same stands to take. But one, white supremacy ain't gonna die tomorrow. It's been here for 400 years. And we ain't gonna get rid of that. So even if we sweep our own porch real well, we still gotta deal with the rest of the world. And so we're still here. Now more of us can sing that tune and we all on the same page on what goes on inside our own homes. But at the end of the day, we don't have to worry about the irrelevance in our lifetimes. We have to worry about it later. But what my hope is, and what I wish more people who are in this vocation, who are in this, who are in ministry, I wish more of us could just want to do so well that 20 years from now, 40 years from now, we're not necessary. Like that. I mean, I want my son not to have to hear people say the things I say because it's just the norm.
Yeah, it's the same thing about the vibe between like the academy and the church, because it's that if we teach people to actually discern and work through these things on their own, well then maybe they won't need me anymore, and that type of thing is like people will be spiritually independent, and then well, what do they need this before? Not realizing that being a spiritual community is very much a thing. It's just that now you got to actually go find something else to do with your little life.
So the most fascinating thing about seminary for me has been seeing the gap between academic knowledge in the Bible and theology and pew knowledge of the Bible and theology. Like there is
go back. Pulpit knowledge. You say it and you were right, so say it. Pulpit knowledge, academic knowledge, and pulpit. Like you were almost there.
And
this is the question, and maybe because y'all are much wiser, and we didn't do this in the introduction, but Courtney and Verdell both have much more like seminary and theological academic knowledge than I do. Like I'm in second year of seminary, but they have studied this and gone through this process.
But Kia, I didn't finish. I'm in second year of seminary too. When I get back to it,
I didn't know that, but
I'm not done. Seminary costs money, and
it does. And I just got off the phone with my financial aid advisor, so we can talk about that once we get off air. But my question is, like, does the pulpit not have this knowledge, or do they not want to share it with
let me. It is the latter. They do not want to share it because there's very many. It's the case where there's some people honestly don't have it. And so that is the honest truth. And so it's in some cases people honestly don't have it. So they don't have it to share. But in a lot of these other situations, particularly denominations where you have to get a seminary degree to be ordained, like your AME, a lot of Baptist churches won't ordain you unless you go to seminary. You know what I mean? And even then, a lot of people have a college degree. And so these people aren't unable to think. Right. And so what I found is that the people, of course, people who, like I say, who don't have knowledge at all, but there's a lot of times where people have the knowledge, have access to it, and refuse to share it.
And I think that's where my courage
and pander to the people.
Right.
I think I don't want to say stole, but I think I've co-opted and used the language. I want to give credit where it's due. I think Dr. Gaffney is the one that said that. She said that it's pandering to the people when you go to school or you know better and refuse to take it back to the people.
And I think that's my big issue. Like the pastor that baptized me and I grew up with, I get it. He didn't have a college education. Seminary was not something that was accessible to him. I get why he taught the way he did. But these people who have gone to seminary, and I think Courtney and I have acknowledged the financial gap between, or the financial pressure around going to seminary. Like, the shit is expensive.
It's almost criminal.
Yeah. And you don't make a lot of money unless you're a T.D. Jakes or Paula White, who we didn't even talk about. But that's a whole other story. Most people don't make a lot of money getting, going through seminary. So there are accessibility issues. But when you have this knowledge and you don't take it to the people, like, what the fuck? I don't know any other way to say it.
Yeah, because this is the excuses that I've heard, and I'm sure that Courtney can back me up on these, is that, one, the people aren't ready. The people don't want that. It's not about all of that. And just on the structural level, like a lot of times when you go to seminary, you learn things, and then when you're trying to be up to be ordained, you have to kind of put some of that in a different box.
Yeah.
Because you have to be ordained, so everything that you learn to seminary won't get you over the line, to be ordained and to get to church. And so it's a structural issue where we require people to go to get this advanced education and then penalize them for exercising it.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And so there's that piece too. And so it's not just like it's a multi-pronged issue. And so many. And I'm just saying this to be totally, completely honest. When I graduated, because I went to seminary twice for whatever. But it's the majority of the people who I went to Howard with, and I graduated in 2012, the majority of them, if I were to line up and hear them preach after whatever, you would probably not know that they went. And I don't say that to be shady. I just say that to be honest. It's like you would not hear anything distinctively different than any old body. And I'm not saying you got to use $10 words, whatever, but just the way that they preach, what they say, how they say it, you wouldn't know. And for a lot of, I know what church I went to, one prominent black church in the area where I was a minister, everybody went to the same seminary. We all had the same professors. It was almost like, all of us, out of the 12 of us, like 10 of us went to the same professor. Some of us were at school at the same time. And so we all had access to the same stuff, but people choose what they share and don't share. And my whole thing was always that, well, as the pastor, you're supposed to be the shepherd. You need to intentionally lead them in a different direction. And people won't do it. Now, sometimes there are actual repercussions. Like there was one pastor in the area, a prominent church, I won't say it. But
tell us once we get off air.
Yes. But this pastor he made an attempt. I already said he, so there's that. But
well, that's 90% of pastors. So
true. So I'm safe.
That. Like you ain't giving nothing away with that one.
Good save. You're right. So this pastor, he tried to go in a more affirmative direction, but he got backlash, so he stopped.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Because it was his job.
And it goes back to what you said, like you don't want anyone to risk their livelihood. So it's this tension between me having the knowledge and the ability to tell the truth, and I hate to say this because I believe this is an excuse more than it is the truth, the people being ready, you know?
I mean, no one has ever, I always look at it like this. It's not about people being ready. It's about us doing what's right. But even doing, because I'm not ready to, I mean, who's ever ready to be oppressed? I don't know if you're ever ready for that. But as to Courtney's point, it's not ever the issue that it's going to happen overnight, but we already are too late. I think that's the point here. So it's not about, and I think, I mean, at one point I was supposed to write about this, but maybe I'll tweet it and somebody else will write about it because that's what always seems to happen now.
Now that you've said it, I'm going to go and write a whole blogette about it.
Yeah, I'll just say it, somebody else can write about it. So the idea of time, and that time is always on the side of the people. Time is never on the side of the oppressed. And so for every time that we say, well, we're not ready, we got things will take time. You know, like that little kid, that young man killed himself. It's too late for him. It's too late for the trans women who are getting killed, right? And it's always about, well, it takes time. And on the one hand, everything literally takes time. I don't think anyone is asking for this massive change overnight. But the reality is that, you know, that little boy is not going to get another chance. He's gone. The trans women who are being murdered, they don't get to try again. It's no continue, put a quarter in and we can play again after you get it right. We can't put all the pieces back in the box. Like it's not a chess game. We can't put it all back in the box and play again. And so this idea about, well, things take time and everybody was alone overnight, that's true. However, that's not an excuse for the fact, like someone's right to be alive and safe is not based off of the speed of my education.
Right.
And I think that's the part that people miss when they make it about the whole growth piece. It's like, just because I don't understand you or your life or whatever doesn't mean that you don't have the right to be safe and happy and whole.
Right.
It doesn't matter, you know.
And my problem with this whole the people aren't ready thing is that, you know what, it's our job as people in leadership to push them to that place where they are ready, as we call it. And for me, acknowledging my call, like finally acknowledging my call and like pushing for a place in church leadership meant that I had to take ownership of the problems that exist, even though I don't perpetuate them. I still have to own them. So I say we because I have to take ownership of that. I have to own that we do harm to people, and so it's our job then to ready the people if it's a matter of readiness. It's our job to teach. It's our job to preach. It's our job to educate. It's our job to delve into things in such a way that people who weren't ready can get there, because it's not our job to back down and let the people determine if we truly believe that God is the one leading us and calling us and telling us what to do and ordering our steps, and the word comes from the Holy Spirit and we're just the vessels. If we really believe that, then we can't let the people who were sent to give this to direct what we do. We have to take that direction only from God, and the people got to catch up. And if they don't like it, they can leave. Like
my professor, yes.
If you don't like it, you
leave. Well, but here's the problem: we worry about losing membership because losing membership means losing money. And so let's be real that we sometimes forego our power that comes from God, and we give that up to the power of the people and the power of the purse. Like,
no, I mean, my professor, I never forget Kenyatta Gilbert, who was like a preaching mentor of mine.
Hey, yes,
and he, I remember in class we were talking about this, and we were talking about just preachers being prophetic or whatever. And I said, okay, like the real tangible reality of, like, you know, people could lose their livelihood, their jobs. And he flat out said, he said, you know, at what point did Jesus ever promise that it would be comfortable. Like Jesus said, there's nowhere for me to lay my head. And so I personally, I never had the concept of ministry as a career. I had the idea of it as a call, which meant I just kind of followed along. But that's really not how most people think of it, to be real about it. And so this idea of people preach, it's a career, it's their job, it's their career. But the way it's set up, if you're going to follow the whole Jesus way, it really is a calling and a duty that you're committed to, as opposed to just, this is my career that I scale. I mean, yeah, pay your bills, I get that, like, it's fine. But if you're going to do the whole idea of calling and all of that, it's like, that stuck with me, because it was like, okay, so it was like Jesus' ministry, quote unquote, led to his death.
Right.
That is the reality.
This has been a repetitive thing that comes up, because from the pulpit, we are told that Jesus died for our sins. But in our conversation with our academic knowledge, we keep saying that Jesus' ministry and Jesus' activism and Jesus opposing the Roman government led to his death, which is a larger conversation, and we don't have time to get here now, but I just want to acknowledge that
Jesus was killed by the cops.
Right. And I don't
want to acknowledge that gap, and maybe that's a show for another time to discuss, why Jesus was murdered.
I don't say Jesus died for our sins. I say Jesus died to overcome sin, because there's a difference. In the words mean things, and there's a difference. And I can truly believe that Jesus was murdered and overcame sin. I don't know that Jesus, does Jesus really care that, if one, what is sin? And two, who gets to define it? But that's another story for another day.
That's a whole nother podcast. Yes. We shall get there. But I did want to point that out to the people, just to get them pondering. So,
right.
Drunk recommendations. Is there anything? So, 2 questions. Is there anywhere where people can go to find more information about what the conversation we've been having? 1. 2, is there anything you've just come across the last week or 2 that you want to share with the people? Either or both and. Hell, I'm drunk. Do whatever you want.
Well, one book I always recommend, I actually gave my copy away to somebody, to a friend. Just generally speaking, a way to have ancient way to have these conversations. A good book is written by, I think we heard it, Jennifer Bird. It's called Permission Granted. And it's a very accessible book talking about just some of the things that we've touched on, about the ways of thinking about the Bible, the context, what certain things meant. And it's presented in a very presentable way. So you don't have to know all this theology, seminary knowledge to do it. And so I recommend that to people, to really look, if they're interested, to pick up that book. I don't know. I'm pretty sure she was on some podcast. So if you're in the podcast, maybe, type that into your podcast app and see if Jennifer Bird pops up, or to see if, it pops up, see what pops up on YouTube, and do that. Also, I would say for people to really consider, if they are seeking therapy and mental health, to consider the ways in which religion may have contributed to some of the traumas that they might have. And so to do some, one of the things this year, one of my activities will be highlighting and elevating religious trauma, and talking about healing from religious trauma. And so just to look, and particularly for Black people, because I don't think the resources are actually, they're there, but I don't really know if they are accessible and amenable to Black people's experience, because of things that we've talked about. So just, if you're struggling in life, to really consider in the ways that religion might have impacted the way that you function, and to look for ways to heal from that. It doesn't mean that you have to automatically throw it out, even though it's okay to not believe. Because I don't believe anymore myself, but I think that needs to be looked up as as another option for Black people, to not believe in anything if they don't want. But I think that just the idea of sitting with the fact that maybe religion has been a big cause of pain in your life, and that to get some way to help to deal with that so you can move forward and be healthy. Those are my two things.
That's good. Thank you. And as someone who, like I said, has been in church a majority of their life, from the womb to about 10 years ago, when I found myself in therapy, what I realized is a lot of what I learned in seminary, it's called embedded theological beliefs, like the things that I was taught and grew up with. A lot of that was the cause that led, it may not have been the cause that put me in therapy, but it infused the reasons that I was in therapy, and I had to really sit with that and deal with what my embedded theological beliefs had led me to do with my life and the choices I had made.
Yeah. I made some terrible choices because I thought this is what God wanted me to do. And I think that it's something that we need to have an honest, particularly people of color, need to have a more honest conversation about. Again, it doesn't mean that everyone has to end up staunch atheists, but I do think that just the way that spirituality and belief in general is handled, because again, I think it's very easy to just implicate the church in this when, I mean, just log on to Instagram in the morning and you just see some of the most terrible spiritual ideas floating around at any given moment. And a lot of that is rooted in spirituality too. And I think that those ideas are the same. It's like, oh, well, you'd be better if you hustle harder. Hustle has nothing to do with it. Like, it's like, stuff like that. So
yes, can someone go in and crash the servers of Sprinkling Jesus, please and thank you? Crash them in the name of all that is right and holy.
Yeah, like it's not just it's not. As someone who is now a non-believer, I can tell you that I've experienced the other side of it being incredibly challenging to be in particular spaces, because just the assumption of a type of spirituality has made it difficult to be like, okay, yeah, I hear what you're saying, but I don't know. But it's just in general, like, the way people even sometimes use astrology and things like that, like, because it's not just a Jesus vote, even though that's most of it. It's not just that, just the way that we hold spirituality in this moment as a salve for what's going on needs to be interrogated a bit. Doesn't mean we throw it out totally, but it needs to be interrogated, because, like, okay, is this healthy? Is this true? It's the reason why you don't. It's not because you're a Taurus, it's because you're mean. That's why you don't have a relationship. Like, you're mean. That's what it is. Or you have you have undealt with trauma. It's not that you're a Libra. Is that you don't know how to make a decision.
Courtney, you have recommendations for us?
Oh goodness. Okay. Yeah, I don't know what they are though. Like, hold on. So I accidentally poured like 4 shots of Patron in my
cup.
My. And like, well,
wine glass empty.
Right.
Empty. So I get it.
So I'm like, yeah, I'm at the point where I'm like, okay, I know some stuff. So I'm just gonna leave it general, right? Read outside of what you normally would, like read something, get some perspective, get a differing opinion, find the places you agree, find the places you disagree, and then go back and do the work of figuring out why. Like, because it's one thing to say I agree with this, and it's another thing to say I agree because XYZ. This lines up with my embedded theology, or my, like, what I believe about God and the nature of God and the character of God, or whether God exists or whatever. And it's those are 2 different things to say, yeah, I agree or I don't agree, but to know why. And and then take it one step further and look at who does this help and who does this hurt for me to think this way. So I don't book or a specific person at the moment. I could name like 20, and like, I mean, like, read a book by a womanist. Like, if you really want a good perspective on things, read Will Gaffney, read Katie Cannon, read Renita Weaves, like, read, like, and like, read these people. Read stuff that's written by somebody that's not a white man. Like, put the NT, whatever his name is, down. Get away from Timothy Keller. Leave that
Oh
that man
God,
that
yes.
harassed me on the internet alone. And find a black woman and read what she had to say about it. Find a
Right.
trans black woman and read what she has to say, and then you really might be learning something. And like, and figure out where you stand and what that does to the people you come in contact with. Like, don't just read it.
Mhm.
Read it and reflect. Read it and reflect deeply so that you know what you're doing to people. And then for the preachers among us, watch. There are some people that do these things. There are some people who do the work. A lot of them are women, and they're not on the conference posters, and they're
Mm-hmm.
not the people. They're not headlining the National Baptist Convention because they ain't letting no woman.
Hold on, pause.
Uh-huh.
My friends, a woman was planning a convention. She sent out a flyer to me to repost
Mm-hmm.
where she was it was a women's convention, but she was the only woman on the flyer with like
Right.
men.
Uh-huh.
And
Oh
I'm
goodness.
Like, no, they gonna eat you alive if you post that, girl. You can't post that.
bitch, I'm not reposting this.
Right. I mean, right. But so, yeah, right. But so we have to find those people and listen to what they're saying, and don't take their words. Don't, but understand, find your place in that conversation, because I mean, Black preaching is a call and response. Like, we talk to each other, and we might. So it's not. So the boundaries of like what's okay to borrow or to, it's a little different. Like, it's not
Mm-hmm.
plagiarizing, but still
Right.
say their name when you use their words.
Right.
Say their name when you use their ideas. Say, this is what they said and this is what I think about it. Like,
Mm-hmm.
don't just take it and just say, like, I came up with this, just the Lord dropped it in my spirit. No, you got that in a book, baby. But find the people. There are plenty of women, and there are a few good men. I'm gonna tell the truth. I'm gonna tell it all. Just like the woman would say, like, we love the
Yes.
women and a few men and some men. There are a number of women and a few men that are doing it. Listen to them. Find your place in that conversation, and then in your small circle of influence, because all of us aren't going to have the platforms. We're not going to all preach to 10,000 people on a Sunday morning. We might be preaching to 10, but find the way you can influence those people, those 10 people in your circle of influence, and push that conversation there.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
And yeah, so
Use your power.
that's what I got.
Yeah.
Read, listen, move outside of where your comfort zone, and then figure out how to bring that in.
So for my recommendations, I just want to like piggyback off of everything that has already been said. Like, Dr. Will Gaffney has come up a number of times, but her book, Woman is Mistress, so that was one of the first books I read in seminary. And when I tell you, it completely opens your mind to what you have set with in your traditional and embedded theology. And it opens your mind to understanding God and the scripture in a whole new way. So especially if you're interested in studying the Bible and the Word, it's all Hebrew Bible, which is what we call as Christians Old Testament. It is an amazing book, and I also think, because I think a lot of us think New Testament Jesus, this is where we need to be, but you cannot completely understand the New Testament and Jesus if you don't understand the Hebrew Bible, Old Testament, and Judaism.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really important. But her work is amazing. Another book that around church life and culture is actually by a white woman. Rachel Held Evans or Evans Hill, I don't know, because why? And her book Searching for Sunday is it's really good about like sitting with culture from the pew and in the church and really thinking about what you hear and reevaluating and really questioning some of the toxic theology that you engage with. She's like an evangelical who has really had to sit and change her embedded theology to a lived theology, a theology that she can fully accept and live out loud, and not just what she has inherited from tradition. So yeah, I really appreciate that work as well. One thing that we didn't do in introductions, and then we're gonna log off because we've been on for like 15 hours. Like we've been on for as long as Aretha's funeral. But what we didn't do in introductions is like tell our experience and knowledge and why we're here. So do you guys want to give like a quick brief of like why you are even knowledgeable enough to have this conversation? Like, why should people listen to you when you're talking about toxic theology?
Oh, okay. I will do this because I think it's important for Black people to tell and to say why they know stuff. Because I don't think we do that enough. And so I am knowledgeable in this one just because of my experience. I was a minister and I was in a number of Christian leadership roles for over a decade. Also, got an MDiv from Howard University, Master of Theological Study from Western Theological Seminary, and then a good strong year of PhD work, and then we just stopped there. But I also have a history and experience with doing a lot of activism in Presbyterian communities. Worked on a couple of national campaigns with some organizations that are talking about progressive faith initiatives and things of that nature. So I have the personal experience in terms of vocation, I have the theological experience in terms of education, and I also have experience dealing with it in an organizing activism capacity. So I think that, given that, I think I, would have something to say, hopefully from those three areas.
Courtney?
Well, so I'm going to say it like this. So what I always say is that I'm not a theologian. I'm not a church historian. I don't know a whole lot about nothing, but I'm a big mouth girl that loves God and loves God's people. Like, that's what I say about myself because that's real. Like, I don't think more highly of myself than I ought to, and I can say what I don't have, and I haven't finished my MDiv, but I got a whole lot of books, and I can read. I've studied. I have a real problem with finishing stuff. And there are reasons why, because I've been through a whole lot in my life that caused me to not be able to finish some things that I started, but I have half of a master's degree in English. I got like 3/4 of a master's degree in psychology. And I have a third of an MDiv currently. That one's gonna get finished. Like it's gonna happen. But I know how to read. I know how to analyze situations and people and the psychological and sociological and social aspects of things. And like I said, I'm a 5th generation preacher. I've grown up in this. I've been both, I've dealt with the purity stuff, the body policing, the women shouldn't preach thing. My grandmother tried to exorcise demons out of me in her bathroom, for God's sake. I'm so serious. So, like, I've dealt with it from all sides. And that's real. Like, I don't know that much. Honestly, I don't know why people would listen to me. I can't tell, but I can tell you what I know. Like, I'm just, and if it resonates somehow, then I'm doing something that, you know, maybe there's a God somewhere. Like that's really, that's it. Like yeah.
And for me, I think first and foremost is I've been a victim of toxic theology. I have been the 17-year-old girl who was pregnant who grew up in church and got pregnant and watched the preacher use misogyny as a way to single me out when every one of his sons had kids out of wedlock, quote unquote, and not been questioned at all. I have been refused communion like publicly in the church because I would not apologize. And it's unclear to me 18 years later if I was apologizing for the sin of having sex, which everyone else in that church was doing outside of marriage, or if I was apologizing for the sin of getting pregnant because I was having sex outside of my, marriage.
Right.
Like there's gray areas there that I'm just not sure of. But also I'm in my second year of seminary and I try not to talk about what I don't know. And I think that's the thing that seminary has taught me, is to not talk about what I don't know with a firm belief that I am right. Seminary has actually changed my whole understanding of what is right when it comes to the Bible, but that's a whole nother podcast. But it has also changed my theological understanding in an understanding of the Bible and how it was created, and religion, and how culture and people influence what we believe today. And it's not just like this aha moment that dropped out the sky that is, there is this clear right and wrong, and this is what you should believe, and this is what is wrong. But there are people involved, and that should be considered, if any of that made sense post my bottle of wine. But I would like to say, did I? Yeah, I did my recommendations. Okay, so thank you for joining us. We will be back eventually. Like, it's been almost a year since our last podcast. So yeah, you will see us soon. If you would like to, if you enjoyed this and you want to know more about some topics, email us over at therealdrunkshow@gmail.com and we'll get it on. And you can find us on all the social media platforms.
It's 11 o'clock.
It's 11 o'clock. It's time for us to talk. You can find us on all the social media platforms at Real Drunk Show. So have a great night. See you when we see you. Bye.